Chapter 477. 3 days had passed. Ghostly, who was waiting in Ghost King's stone chamber, his expression had already turned from the initial calm indifference to uneasiness and then to anxiety, and now his face was filled with irritation and impatience. To him, even though he had thought that this astrolabe was after all not an ordinary treasure, to comprehend its mystery required a long period of mental preparation, but he had never thought that it would take as long as 3 days, and most importantly, although these 3 days had passed, Mr. Ghost still did not seem to have any progress. According to his original thoughts, when Mr. Ghost first came into contact with the astrolabe, it triggered a change in the astrolabe. He should have some understanding of this treasure. After a few days of study, it would not be difficult to understand the mystery. Who knew that in these 3 days he stayed beside Mr. Ghost, only saw Mr. Ghost turning this ancient celestial weapon over and over, not to mention memorizing it. Ghostly even felt that Mr. Ghost should have memorized all the ancient characters on the small jade pieces that kept sliding in the middle of the astrolabe. However, Mr. Ghost was clearly in some kind of predicament, or it could be said in comprehending this treasure, Mr. Ghost had met with an extremely difficult problem. After a few days, there was no progress at all. Ghost King's stone chamber, compared to the other stone chambers in the majestic Fox Mountain Cave, was naturally much more spacious and was divided into 2 parts. The larger one on the outside was where Ghost Lee and Mr. Ghost studied the astrolabe. The smaller one on the inside was naturally Ghost King's bedroom. Although Ghost King was not around, but in these 3 days, Ghost Lee and Mr. Ghost did not step into the room with their skills, not to mention 3 days and 3 nights. Even if they did not sleep for 10 days and 10 nights, they could still hold on. Just that the most unbearable part was still the word waiting. For these 3 days, Ghostly did not leave this stone chamber. Xiao Hui also stayed here, but the monkey was restless, not moving for 3 days. Xiao Hui was suffocated. Right now, Ghostly and Mr. Ghost were still staring at that astrolabe treasure. In these 3 days, they could not be bothered with Xiao Hui. Xiao Hui scurried to and fro in this stone chamber. After these 3 days, it had long familiarized itself with every corner. Right now, it jumped on a Ghost King's big table. If it was any other day, no one in Ghost King's sect would dare to do so, but right now, the sky was high and the Emperor was far away. No one bothered about it. Xiao Hui was bored to death, lying down on the large study table for a while and then getting up again, dancing with joy for a while, and then lying down on all fours. In the end, it was too bored to be alone and could only awkwardly sit up again, scratching its head, making low sounds, looking around, trying to find some fun. Although this stone chamber was spacious, but it was not exaggeratedly big, so naturally, its eyes saw the inner room. Xiao Hui scratched its head, turned, and looked at Ghostly. Ghostly's face was dark. Some viciousness surfaced on his face. Evidently, he was in a bad mood, and Mr. Ghost was concentrating on that astrolabe in his hand, which was emitting faint white, gentle light. Occasionally looked up, glanced at Ghostly, and then looked away again. Both of them were clearly focused on the astrolabe. Even if they had a little extra vigilance, they would at most look at each other. No one paid any attention to the monkey. Xiao Hui shrugged its shoulders, curled its lips, it grumbled twice, its tail wagged twice, turned its body, looked at the inner room for a while, and then jumped down from the table, slowly walked over. The furnishings in Ghost King's residence were not luxurious. Instead, it was very simple, showing that the owner of this place did not care about worldly luxuries. The outer room was like that. The inner room was also like that. A wooden bed, a round table, 3 round stools for paintings hung on the surrounding stone walls. One was a freehand brushwork of mountains and rivers. Pale ink with white margins had an otherworldly feeling. The second was flowers and birds welcoming spring, birds flying on the flowers full of spring. The third painting was a crouching tiger among the trees. The artistic conception was different from the previous 2. The tiger's aura was awe-inspiring. Its power was biting cold. Impressively had the intention of looking down on the world. Xiao Hui naturally did not understand the artistic conception of paintings, what landscape, flowers, and birds in the monkey's eyes. It was no different from a white cloth. But the third crouching tiger painting, the tiger's aura was awe-inspiring. It was rather realistic. Xiao Hui was stunned for a moment, but then reacted, bared its teeth, and made a face at the tiger on the wall, a sound of spitting. These 3 paintings were hung side by side on the inner room's stone wall, reflecting each other. Although the artistic conception of the paintings was very different, but looking at it, there was an indistinct harmony, forming its own pattern. And opposite to these 3 paintings, on the other side of the stone wall, there was only one painting. The painting was not of mountains and rivers, not of flowers and birds, but of a beautiful lady. This painting was a meticulous brushwork, extremely detailed. That beautiful lady from the rings and earrings were all extremely realistic, not to mention the dignified and beautiful countenance made people who looked at her involuntarily fall in love. It could be said to be a rare painting treasure in the world. Just that in the human's eyes, the treasures in the painting in the monkey's 3 eyes, naturally, it would be greatly discounted. Xiao Hui looked at it without any expression of astonishment. After a few glances, it turned back to look at that tiger portrait. He didn't know what a good painting looked like in the eyes of a monkey. Perhaps it should be a painting of a few monkeys? What exactly the monkey liked to draw? People naturally had no way of knowing, but right now Xiao Hui was obviously most concerned about that painting of the crouching tiger in the jungle. Its 3 eyes blinked and jumped to the bottom of the painting, lifting its head to look at the painting. That tiger in the painting was awe-inspiring. Its skills were also not to be underestimated. The strokes were vigorous. There seemed to be a ferocious tiger breaking out of the painting, raising its head to the sky and letting out a long roar that could intimidate thousands of beasts. Xiao Hui watched for a long time, suddenly turned and looked outside. Ghostly and Mr. Ghost figures were already blocked by the stone wall, and after such a long time, there was still no movement outside. Evidently, no one had noticed Xiao Hui's movements. The monkey turned back, scratched its head. The next moment, as if it had suddenly made up its mind, leapt up abruptly, leapt high up from the ground. These 3 paintings were originally hung on the stone walls. Other than the walls, there were no tables or chairs that could be climbed. Normally, ordinary monkeys and beasts would not be able to reach them. Just that Xiao Hui was not an ordinary monkey. With this leap, it actually reached the top of the painting. Its claws lifted up and easily took down the painting. Just that the painting was rather long. Following Xiao Hui's fall, it could not stop itself and also made a sound, dropped onto the ground. Although the sound was not loud, but what kind of people were the 2 people outside? Immediately it alarmed them. After a moment of silence, Ghost Li's voice was heard. With a puzzled tone he called out, "Xiao Hui." Following a strange sound of dragging the ground, under Ghost Li and Mr. Ghost's gazes, the monkey ran out from Ghost King's stone chamber. At the same time its hand was holding a painting. The other half of the paper was scattered, dragged on the ground, dragged to Ghost Li. Ghost Li and Mr. Ghost were stunned for a moment. Xiao Hui clutched the painting tightly in its hand, ran to Ghost Li, incessantly called out. Ghost Li frowned, stretched out his hand to take the painting over, unfolded it to take a look. It was an exquisitely drawn picture of a crouching tiger in the jungle. He assessed it from top to bottom, looked at Xiao Hui, said, "What are you doing with this painting?" Xiao Hui jumped up, danced with joy, its face full of excitement. Both hands waved, either pointing at the tiger in the painting or drawing a strange picture in the air, and then pointing to the north. Extremely busy. Mr. Ghost, who was beside, was dazzled. Although he was extremely knowledgeable, but towards this 3-eyed monkey's monkey language, he did not understand anything. Filled with questions, he could only turn and look at Ghost Li, who knew that Ghost Li's expression was also stunned. Watching Xiao Hui's movements and the incessant cries, Ghost Li glanced at the painting again, hesitated for a moment, said, "You don't tell me you feel that the thing in this painting is very similar to De Huang, and so want to bring this painting away and give it to De Huang in the future?" Xiao Hui immediately nodded repeatedly. Although Ghost Li was not in a good mood, but he still could not help but laugh. The tiger in the painting was indeed lifelike, but its might was imposing. Even if it was lying in the bushes, it was still awe-inspiring. How could it be compared to that big bamboo valley? Although its fur was bright, but extremely lazy, gluttonous, and sleepy big dog? Furthermore, no matter how Ghost Li looked, he really could not tell which part of this tiger was similar to De Huang. Seemed like the monkey's vision was really different from humans. But after the laughter, Ghostly also thought of De Huang 1,000 miles away, and that mountain peak that brought warmth in his memories. After a moment of silence, a faint smile appeared on his lips. His expression also turned much gentler. Quietly said, "This painting belongs to Ghost King's sect leader. It is not good to take it away now, but don't worry. I will ask him for it for you later." Speaking, he gently rolled up the painting and placed it aside. Mr. Ghost could not help but ask, "Who is De Huang?" Ghostly paused, and then faintly glanced at Mr. Ghost, said, "A dog." Mr. Ghost paused, could not speak for a moment, and then coughed once, did not speak, and turned his eyes back to the astrolabe. Ghostly stroked Xiao Hui's head, quietly instructed it. It was nothing other than telling Xiao Hui not to run around, and then turned his attention back to the astrolabe. After all, in his heart, understanding the astrolabe was the most important thing right now. Xiao Hui sat beside the two of them for a while, and very quickly became bored again. Actually, it was not the monkey's fault. Anyone who stayed beside the two of them for 3 days and 3 nights, only to see them doing the same thing, would also be annoyed, not to mention the monkey, who was naturally active. At this moment, Mr. Ghost seemed to have discovered something, suddenly pointed to those small moving pieces of jade in the middle of the plate, and said, "I think the crux of this treasure is on these continuously sliding pieces of jade." Ghostly slowly nodded, clearly agreed with this view, but then his brows slightly frowned, said, "But we have watched for 3 days and still could not figure out why these pieces of jade can move on their own. Not sure what is Mister's opinion." Mr. Ghost pondered for a moment, said, "Do you feel the trajectory of these pieces of jade is similar to the movement of the stars in the firmament?" Ghostly's body shook and then stared intently at the astrolabe. After a long while, clapped his hands and said, "It indeed makes some sense." Mr. Ghost said, "Actually, I also do not have much confidence, but it feels so, just that even though these pieces of jade are moving like the stars in the firmament, but there are still many undeciphered mysteries. I think if we want to understand this treasure, the crux is on the ancient characters on these pieces of jade." Ghostly slowly nodded. Both of them continued to converse, asking and answering each other. Very soon they were again immersed in this astrolabe treasure. Xiao Hui sat for a long while, and then turned to leave. In the stone chamber, Ghostly and Mr. Ghost's soft whispers were heard. Xiao Hui looked around for a moment, in its boredom, quietly walked into the inner chamber again. There were some marks on the stone wall, where the painting had just been pulled off. There was a slight difference in color from the surrounding stone walls. It seemed that this painting had been hanging there for some time. Just that in this inner chamber, other than the 4 paintings, there was only the wooden bed, table, and chairs. There was nothing else interesting. Xiao Hui touched here and there. Not long after, it became bored again. Just when it was really bored to the extreme, suddenly the monkey's 3 eyes suddenly lit up, as if it had discovered something. And then with a leap, its entire body suddenly jumped on a Ghost King's wooden bed, not caring if it dirted the bedding. It actually started to roll and toss about on it. Although the furnishings in the stone chamber were simple, but it was very clean. Most likely Ghost King was also a person who liked cleanliness. If he came back and saw this scene, would he be seething with anger? But right now, Xiao Hui did not care so much. Anyway, there was no one to care about it. It was minding its own business on the bed, jumping and jumping. Suddenly, it seemed to have bumped into something at a corner of the bed. The entire bed suddenly vibrated. Following which, on the stone wall that the bed was leaning against, a large crack quietly split open and then slowly and soundlessly retreated to both sides, revealing a large hole that allowed one person to enter and exit. Xiao Hui had already felt something the moment the bed shook and jumped down, crouched on the ground, and watched in bewilderment, until it saw a secret door quietly revealed on the stone wall. The monkey slowly stood up, glanced into the secret door, but it was pitch black inside. Nothing could be seen, but there were no ferocious monsters running out. And that mysterious black hole, right now, seemed to have some enticement to the bored monkey, seemed to be gently waving to it. Xiao Hui scratched its head, turned and glanced behind. In the stone chamber outside, Ghostly and Mr. Ghost were again in silence. Seemed like it was going to be another long period of meditation. The monkey turned around, suddenly grinned, made a funny face, and then lightly leapt up into that black hole In a short while, its figure disappeared into the darkness. A faint gust of wind gently blew out from that mysterious black hole on the stone wall. It carried with it a faint smell of blood. Once it entered the secret door, Xiao Hui's third eye in the middle of its forehead flashed with a faint golden light, emitting a strange light. Under this faint golden light, the dark cave could be vaguely seen clearly. The tunnel that could only accommodate a person's height, it was not very smooth for a person to walk on, but to a monkey, it was more than enough. Xiao Hui, with a sense of adventure and excitement, walked for a while in this tunnel, and then felt the ground under its feet suddenly sank. This tunnel turned downwards. The stone walls on both sides of the tunnel, as it went deeper, it gradually became damp. At some places, there were even water droplets gently dripping down in the darkness. In the extremely quiet passageway, only the monkey's figure was slowly moving forward. In the darkness ahead, there would occasionally be a light breeze that carried a strange and faint smell of blood. Chapter 478. This downhill path was not steep, but rather long. Xiao Hui walked for a long time. It should be deep into the underground of majestic Fox Mountain. It was also at this moment that Xiao Hui suddenly stopped in his tracks. Somewhere in the distance, a faint red light suddenly lit up. The monkey stood in the passageway for a while, seemingly hesitant. After a while, it turned back to look at the path it had come from and scratched its head, as if hesitating whether it should go back and inform its master. However, the red light in front of it seemed to be tempting it, flickering gently. Finally, after the monkey squeaked twice, it carefully moved forward. As it neared that red light, the faint smell of blood in the path slowly became stronger. Xiao Hui's expression also became nervous, stretched out its nose to sniff the air, its eyes bewildered. But in the end, the red light was right before it. It still moved forward. Finally, before the red light, it was actually another entrance of this tunnel. Xiao Hui peeked out from here, and with a leap jumped out. The next moment, the monkey was already on a large road that was several times wider than the previous tunnel. Other than the tunnel that Xiao Hui came in from, there was another tunnel that was connected to it, just beside the tunnel that Xiao Hui jumped down from, but it was equally dark and gloomy, not knowing where it led to. And on the other side of the main path, it was completely different from the darkness in the tunnel. It was very bright, especially the red light flashing incessantly at the end of the main path. It seemed like what Xiao Hui saw from afar in the tunnel was this scene. There was still no one around. Even at the end of the bright red light, there were only flashes of light and no strange sounds. Xiao Hui sniffed the air. The smell of blood was so strong that it would not dissipate. And after a moment, Xiao Hui's eyes suddenly froze, landed on the entrance that it had just entered from, the original green stone wall, without knowing when had turned dark red, and the water, slowly dripping from the damp places on the wall, in the light, looked extremely red, like fresh blood. One drop, slowly dripping down. The golden eye on Xiao Hui's forehead gradually brightened. After staring at that blood bead for a long while, it slowly turned around, looked at that flickering red light in the distance. After a long while, the monkey once again strided forward, walked towards that direction. The red glow flickered strangely, as if it had a mind of its own. It gently breathed out and gradually expanded, engulfing the figure of the monkey that was slowly walking over. It was already late at night. Although one could not clearly feel the change of day and night in the majestic Fox Mountain cave, but outside the cave, the night sky was dotted with stars, starlight twinkling, like countless days of the past spilled over. Also in the dark and barren majestic Fox Mountain, illuminated some places. Under the starlight, suddenly a white figure floated over from afar. Light and graceful, looked weightless, like a leaf in the wind, blown over by the night wind, slowly landed on the majestic Fox Mountain peak. Borrowing the faint starlight, this white, graceful figure turned over. Delicate eyebrows and watery eyes, fair skin, a faint seductive charm that made one's heart palpitate. Lingering between her eyebrows, it was the nine-tailed celestial fox Xiao Bai. Right now, Xiao Bai's eyebrows were slightly frowning. Her face also had a rare, solemn expression. She stood on the majestic Fox Mountain peak, The night wind blew gently. The surroundings were barren. Not a single tree could block the wind. Her robe fluttered, revealing her voluptuous and alluring figure. Xiaobai slowly looked around. The majestic Fox Mountain now. Everywhere were rocks and gravel. Not to mention trees, there was not even a single weed. Looking at this desolate scenery, who would believe that just a few decades ago, this was still a beautiful place? Others did not know, but Xiaobai knew, because the area around majestic Fox Mountain was where the Fox Demon Clan ancestors originated and lived. She grew up here. The mountains and rivers, every grass and tree, to her, were all different from other places. However, all of that had mysteriously disappeared at some point in time. All that was left was the desolation in front of him. Xiaobai slowly crouched down, stretched out her fair hand, gently grabbed a handful of soil. No, it should be sand. The majestic Fox Mountain ground was cracked, leaving only gravel. The hard gravel spread out in her delicate hand. Xiaobai carefully looked at the gravel in her hand. A strange glint flashed in her eyes, as if trying to see something from this small gravel. After a while, she slowly closed her palm, clenched it into a fist, and gently loosened it. The sand quietly slid down from between her fingers, but in the air, it was blown away by the night wind from afar, reflecting a faint light under the starlight, disappearing into the dark distance under the curtain of night. The gravel here was no different from other places. Xiaobai slowly stood up, looked up at the starry sky. The starlight shone on her, like a gentle hand gently caressing her, comforting her. She frowned slightly, pondered for a long time. Suddenly, her eyes widened as if she had thought of something. However, she didn't make any big movements. Instead, she strangely lifted her leg and stomped heavily on the ground like a little girl in the secular world when she was angry and acted like a spoiled child. Pooh! A deep, muffled sound sounded in the night wind, drifted with the wind. A wave of dust rose and then gently settled down in the wind. The next moment, suddenly from the ground below Xiaobai's feet, a strange sound was heard, continuous and uninterrupted, rang for almost half a cup of tea's time, and then gradually calmed down. Xiaobai's lips curled, her white body like duckweed, like being lifted up by the wind, extremely graceful, but her pair of watery eyes only stared at the ground below her feet. The next moment, her body in the air suddenly spread out her sleeves, brushed towards the ground. The brushing force was not small. Even a few sharp whistling sounds were heard in the night sky. When the sleeves brushed past the ground, immediately sand and stones flew, dust flew. Whitey, who was in midair, did not stop. It waved its sleeves continuously. After waving 7 times, the smoke and dust on the ground had already formed a small gray tornado. It was filled with gravel and sand. It rotated rapidly and swept up under the starry night sky. Xiaobai lightly whistled. Her body abruptly pulled up by more than 10 feet under the starlight. Her white figure floated like a fairy, dazzling and with another kind of seductive beauty. As her figure rose, the tornado formed by the sand was suddenly pulled up by an invisible force, but it suddenly blew in the opposite direction of Xiaobai. The wind speed was so fast that in a short while, the wind pillar mixed with countless sand had completely fallen into the distance. Rumbling sounds continuously came from the darkness, presumably the sound of those stones smashing on the ground. And under Xiaobai's feet, where the original majestic Fox Mountain peak was a 6 chi wide, 10 feet deep large hole, Xiaobai's movements were able to dig such a large hole in the hard as Iron Mountain Peak. This skill was already shocking, but with her 1,000 years of cultivation as a 9-tailed celestial fox, it was not unexpected. However, Little White clearly did not come to the top of the mountain to dig a hole in the middle of the night out of boredom. She slowly descended from midair, and her eyes never left the hole. Her white figure directly floated into the deep hole. Once in the deep hole, Xiaobai's descending speed immediately became extremely slow, as if there was something invisible supporting her body under her feet, and she also stared intently at the walls of the huge hole, using the faint starlight in the sky. Focused, fair slender hands, pressed on a rough stone wall, formed a sharp contrast A strange feeling, but Xiao Bai did not seem to notice these. She only followed her own hands, followed her body as she slowly descended, carefully looked at the walls of the hole. Reflected in her eyes was a greenish gray stone wall, rough and hard, cold to touch. Then, as Xiao Bai's body slowly descended, her eyes also slowly descended one chi. It was still greenish gray stone. No change at all, the same as the mountains above and in this world. She continued to descend, her fair hands on the rock wall, gently descended, 2 chi deep. It was still the same greenish gray hard rock. 3 chi, 4 chi, 5 chi. There was no change, it was still that hard rock. The cold feeling seemed to have been passed down for thousands of years, now suddenly seeing the light of day from the rough surface of the rock wall, coldly exuded. Xiao Bai's face did not have any expression, her body still gently descending. The next moment, suddenly, her eyes lit up, her body shook in the air, stopped, on the rock wall 6 feet above the ground, next to her white palm. Finally, the first abnormality appeared on the hard rock. A faint red mark, like a tiny blood vessel, appeared on the rock. Xiao Bai stared intently at the tiny red mark for a long time. Suddenly her lips curled into a sneer, and then her body slowly descended, her eyes still staring intently at the rock wall. As expected, as her figure gradually descended, more abnormalities appeared in front of her. The greenish-gray rock that should have been harder the further down she went. Now the deeper the cracks on the rock wall slowly increased, and the color of the rock also gradually deepened, slowly turning red. The red marks increased. The color also became darker and darker. After reaching 10 feet deep, Xiao Bai slowly turned and looked. In front of her was already a dark red rock wall. Thick cracks could be seen everywhere, and around her, the rock wall was no longer cold. Instead, it gave off a thick smell of blood. That ghastly blood red, that kind of horror that was about to devour people. Xiao Bai's eyes revealed an unconcealable look of disgust. With a cold snort, her figure moved and her white figure soared into the sky. She flew out of the cave and landed on the ground beside the deep pit. The starlight in the night shone down and once again landed on her white figure. Like water, it washed away the nightmarish scene from before. Xiao Bai's face was indifferent, took a deep breath, faced the night breeze from afar, looked up at the sky. The next moment, she suddenly laughed coldly, quietly muttered to herself, "For thousands of years, there are always some people who do not know the immensity of heaven and earth, want to do some stupid things. What will happen to them? Let us see together." The ice-cold laughter gently drifted in the night wind, drifting away with the wind, not knowing which corner of the world it drifted to. And under the curtain of the night, under the starlight, that beautiful white figure still stood at the peak of the mountains, facing the wind, with a bit of breathtaking beauty, standing alone and lonely. This late night, it seemed like there were also many people who could not sleep, as if something was lingering in their hearts, and there was an inexplicable feeling. People always had some indescribable feeling. In the majestic Fox Mountain cave, Ghostly and Mr. Ghost were still concentrating on the astrolabe. They had already reached an extremely crucial moment. With Mr. Ghost's profound knowledge, he had already managed to deduce a few of the ancient characters on the astrolabe. Although he had yet to understand the astrolabe's mysteries, but clearly it was already much better than before. And in Ghost Lee's nervousness, suddenly he sensed something. His eyes left the astrolabe for a moment, looked around, saw that it was empty. Xiao Hui had gone somewhere to play, or perhaps found a place to sleep. A flash from the corner of his eyes landed on the scroll beside him, was silent for a moment, seemed to recall something. A faint smile revealed on his lips. Just at this smile, although warm but disappeared very quickly, he gently shook his head, as if throwing away something that he should not be thinking about right now, and then went back into that profound astrolabe. In another place in the belly of majestic Fox Mountain, in a quiet cold stone room, smoke gently drifted. Bai Yu was still sleeping quietly, and beside her, Ghost King quietly sat upright. Gray hair hung down from his head, reminding him that he was already old, and the person sleeping beside him made his heart ache even more. In such a late night, like the countless nights in these 10 years, he did not feel sleepy. He quietly waited for dawn, waited for tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow, everything would really change. His hand, unconsciously clenched into a fist. Far away, 1,000 miles away, the same lonely and quiet night. High up in Qingyuan Hill, small bamboo valley, the night wind howled, the bamboo swayed. Lu Sweki slowly sat up from the bed. This night, for some reason, she could not sleep. Tossing and turning. For whom? She gently got off the bed, did not wear shoes, just walked barefoot on the ground. A chill came from the soles of her feet. The ground was as cool as water. She walked to the window and stretched out her hand to push it open. The starlight that filled the sky flowed like ripples and instantly spilled in, causing her beautiful face to shine even more brilliantly. Lu Sweki quietly gazed at the stars in the horizon, motionless. In such a late night, the person far away, was he also under the starry sky? That faint starlight, did also spilled on him? She quietly gazed at the starry sky, did not move again, like she was also anticipating something. The starlight was faint but seemed eternal and unchanging, seeing through the vicissitudes of the world, seeing through gratitude and grudges, love and hatred. Maybe tomorrow will be better. In her heart, she quietly thought like this. Tomorrow, what would it be like? Nobody knew. Chapter 479. The red light flickered incessantly, illuminating the huge space as if it was daytime. The surroundings were filled with the pungent smell of blood. A wide platform path extended out from the cave entrance, all the way to the middle of the huge cave. Xiao Hui carefully walked out from the tunnel, jumped onto the platform. Its weak little body in this huge cave seemed extremely tiny. Obviously, this was a place that was very different from the other places. Even the active and curious monkey, right now, also felt something and did not immediately run forward. Instead stood where it was, its 3 eyes looking around. As far as the eye could see, there was a red hue everywhere. Red shadows flashed in midair, and occasionally there would be a commotion in the silence, but it was a strange red wind that swept past. And under the monkey's feet, the ground on the platform also revealed a strange dark red color. Xiao Hui looked around for a while and then slowly moved forward in the huge space. Right now, only its small figure was moving. The incessant red light shone down from above, reflecting its figure, leaving a long shadow behind it. Just like that, it slowly moved forward. Xiao Hui at times turned its head to look around. Just that although the atmosphere here was extremely strange, but as Xiao Hui moved forward, nothing happened. Very soon, Xiao Hui reached the end of the platform. Standing at the end of the platform, the smell of blood was already at its strongest. Even Xiao Hui could not help but show disgust on its face, stretched out its palm, and fanned continuously in front of its nose. At the end of the platform, in the middle of the huge cave, below was a deep blood pool. Xiao Hui slowly walked to the edge of the platform, carefully crouched on the rock, stretched out its head, and looked down. What appeared in front of it was a huge pool of blood. The water in the pool was as red as blood, and countless small bubbles were constantly emerging from the bottom of the pool, bursting on the surface of the water and emitting a strong smell of blood. There were 4 gigantic spirit beasts in the blood, and they seemed to be imprisoned. Most of their bodies were soaked in the blood, and they looked weak and exhausted. Most of the time, they didn't move at all. Suddenly, Xiao Hui's body seemed to stiffen. At the same time, the eye in the middle of its forehead abruptly lit up. Among the 4 spiritual beasts, one looked like a dragon but not a dragon, sharp teeth and fangs. At first glance, it looked like a pig. It was the savage torch dragon. The other was a one-legged, huge body, its voice like thunder, soaked in the blood water, but still like a small hill. It was the eastern Sikue Nyo. These 2 spiritual beasts, Xiao Hui had never seen them before, after a few glances, but the remaining 2 were spiritual beasts that it had seen before. One was shaped like a phoenix, gorgeous feathers, indistinctly had the might of the Emperor of Birds. It was the spiritual beast that guarded the celestial emperor treasury in the western Great Marsh, the yellow bird, and the last spiritual beast. It made Xiao Hui even more shocked and angered. It was the ferocious beast that followed. Beside the beast deity, After the beast deity passed away, it befriended Xiao Hui, Tai. Forget about the other 3 spiritual beasts being trapped. Anyway, Xiao Hui was not very familiar with them. Among them, the yellow bird even had some enmity with Xiao Hui. If Xiao Hui saw it in such a state, most likely it would even jump up and clap its hands in joy. But Xiao Hui and Tao Tai's friendship was not shallow. Looking at Tao Tai's listless and weak appearance soaked in blood, Xiao Hui immediately became anxious. Zzz, loudly called out from the platform. This call immediately broke the tranquility of the blood pool. The 4 great spiritual beasts were not ordinary animals. Although they were imprisoned by the strange formation here, their spiritual energy was almost completely absorbed, but they still raised their heads, almost at the same time, looked up. Far away from the blood pool, on the side of the platform high up above, a monkey actually appeared, screaming loudly towards the bottom. The other 3 spiritual beasts had yet to react, but the Tao Tai had already recognized Xiao Hui at one glance. Its huge head turned and made a roar, just that this roar had only been made halfway before it weakly lowered down. It was obvious that the Tao Tai's spiritual energy had been depleted by 90%, and it was already extremely exhausted. Xiao Hui saw Tao Tai's miserable state. It was even more furious, but in its shock and anger, it did not know what to do, scratched its ears and cheeks on the platform, anxiously pacing around. And in the blood pool below, the other spiritual beasts seemed to have noticed Xiao Hui's unusual behavior. It was not like those humans who usually set up the formation. For a moment, the cries of phoenixes and thunders, together with the indescribable hung hung ho ho of the candle dragon, were all heard, in which there was a pleading tone. The 4 spiritual beasts imprisoned by the 4 divinities' blood formation were originally extremely tyrannical heaven and earth spiritual beasts. They had never put anything in their eyes, not to mention being forced to plead like right now. From this, one could imagine the viciousness of the 4 divinities' blood formation. Even these primitive heaven and earth spiritual beasts could not withstand the torture of being devoured and soaked in blood. Waves of wails were heard. Xiao Hui was like an ant beside a hot pot, circling around. Suddenly, it seemed to have made up its mind, stamped its feet, and actually leapt out from the platform. This action was seen by the 4 spiritual beasts below. Immediately a commotion broke out, but Xiao Hui's tail kept on swaying. Its body abruptly turned back in mid-air, like being carried by the wind. With a sound, it landed on the stone pillar below the platform. Monkeys were best at climbing, although the stone pillar was towering, but it was still very rough, rocks protruding out everywhere. Normal people would be intimidated by it, but to Xiao Hui, it was the best foothold. Xiao Hui's gray figure swiftly descended from a stone pillar. A distance of several zhongs. In a short while, it had already climbed down from the platform, nearing the blood pool. The blood water was right in front of it. The smell of blood made one want to vomit. The surrounding was all red water surface. Bubbles kept popping up from the front, back, left, and right of the water surface, and then made soft sounds before bursting. The spiritual beast nearest to the stone pillar was not the Tao Tai, but the eastern sea kuei cow whose body was as huge as a small hill. The Tao Tai was at the front left of the kuei cow. Xiao Hui grabbed the stone pillar and looked down. With its intelligence, naturally it would not think of touching that terrifying and strange blood water below. After a while, Xiao Hui seemed to have seen something. Its 4 limbs retracted, and then both of its legs abruptly stomped on the stone pillar. Borrowing this force, its entire body leapt out. This leap actually leapt over half a zhongs away. Just happened to land on the kuei cow's stomach where blood water was gushing out, following which, borrowing this foothold, it leapt with all its might again, its gray figure sweeping across a smooth trajectory on the blood water surface. Just happened to land on the only part of the Tao Tai's head above the water surface. GG. Once it landed on the Tao Tai, Xiao Hui immediately cried out. At the same time, both of its hands felt the exposed skin on the Tao Tai's head, like it was extremely concerned to see what kind of injuries its old friend had suffered. And the Tao Tai, that was usually extremely ferocious right now, seemed to be very pleased with Xiao Hui's arrival. Its mouth emitted a low roar. At the same time, its head slowly turned Around them, the other three spiritual beasts, soaking in the blood pool, were all silent, no longer made a sound, only silently watching the Taotai and Xiao Hui. Xiao Hui searched the hard skin on the Taotai's head for a while, stopped, as if it was puzzled. For a moment it could not make sense of the surrounding situation, sat on the Taotai's head, stretched out its hand, and scratched its head. Unexpectedly at this moment, Xiao Hui seemed to be careless for a moment, forgot that the Taotai was not like the Kuei cow. Only its head was exposed, the space left for the monkey to stand on was not big. It slightly relaxed. In a moment of inattention, the tip of its tail accidentally fell into the surrounding blood water. Xiao Hui, like it was suddenly scalded by boiling water, abruptly jumped up. The other spiritual beasts immediately stirred. Low cries incessantly sounded, and the Taotai under Xiao Hui's feet was also startled, but it held on to Xiao Hui's head and did not dare to move recklessly, for fear that if it moved too violently it would throw Xiao Hui into the blood water. It could only growl continuously. At the same time, its two bell-sized eyes desperately rolled upwards, trying to see what exactly was happening to Xiao Hui. Its appearance was like a human rolling his eyes. Very funny. Xiao Hui grabbed its own tail and placed it in front of its eyes, saw that the short section of tail that touched the blood water, although it did not split the skin and flesh, but there were some signs of burning, as if it was scalded by a flame. The monkey was stunned for a moment, and then puffed up its cheeks, fiercely blew a few mouthfuls of air at its tail, not knowing if by doing so, it could slightly reduce the pain. Following that, Xiao Hui loosened its tail and carefully stood properly. It then stretched out its hand and patted the Taotai's head, indicating that it was fine. The Taotai then calmed down, and the other three spiritual beasts also calmed down. Just that after a moment, Xiao Hui's gaze swept past the Taotai and the other three spiritual beasts, saw that they were all powerlessly imprisoned in the pool of blood water. The anger in its eyes immediately intensified. The monkey's tail had only touched the blood water a little, and it was already so powerful. These four spiritual beasts were actually soaked in the blood water all day long. The torment they were suffering was simply unimaginable. The anger in Xiao Hui's eyes grew, abruptly jumped up from the Taotai's head. Its mouth, Yi called out, at the same time stretched out its hand to pull the Taotai, as if it wanted to pull it up from the blood water. Looking at Xiao Hui's actions, the other three spiritual beasts again let out a series of low wails. At the same time, the Taotai did not follow Xiao Hui's pull and stood up. On the contrary, its huge head was slowly shaking. Xiao Hui was stunned for a moment, called out twice, as if it did not understand. Just at that moment, a low, thunderous sound was suddenly heard ahead. It was made by the Kuei Nyo, Xiao Hui, Taotai, and the other two spiritual beasts, the candle dragon and the yellow bird, looked over at the same time. The Kuei Nyo seemed to want to explain something. After a low roar, its entire huge body started to slowly tremble. Looking at its appearance, it actually had the intention to stand up. The rest of the spiritual beasts all stared intently at the Kuei Nyo. The Kuei Nyo's body was the largest among the four spiritual beasts. It seemed to have the best stamina as well, just that it trembled and struggled for a while. When its body was about to kneel and stand up, suddenly, above the blood pool they were in, for dark red light pillars appeared, as if it was real, immediately enveloping the four spiritual beasts in the dark red light. And the Kuei Nyo's struggling huge body seemed to immediately lose its strength like a small mountain toppling. With a sound, it once again fell into the blood pool. Blood splattered everywhere, and the mournful cries indistinctly carried some desolation. And the other spiritual beasts that were enveloped by the dark red light pillars, at the same time, also revealed pained expressions. Xiao Hui stood on the Taotai's head, under the dark red light pillar. Naturally, it was also enveloped, but for some reason, probably because Xiao Hui was not under any restraints, Xiao Hui was only startled for a moment and then felt that it was fine. The four light pillars shot down from above, after enveloping the four spiritual beasts. Very soon, in the dark red light flashing, strands of fine white spiritual energy were sucked out from the spiritual beast bodies, quietly drifting upwards. Seeing this scene, Xiao Hui naturally understood everything, abruptly lifted its head. Its 3 eyes opened wide, especially that golden eye in the middle of its forehead. Golden light flashed. Strange splendor circulated. The dark red pillar of light enveloping the 4 spirit beasts slowly thinned from the bottom to the top, then gradually rose. In the end, it was fired from a strange cauldron that was hovering in the air over 100 feet taller than the platform in the sky. Xiao Hui stared intently at that strange cauldron, suddenly made a sharp cry. Both of its feet stomped. Its body had already left the Taotai's head, leapt straight towards the Kuei Nyo. The other spiritual beasts all stared at Xiao Hui. Xiao Hui's body was gliding in the air, but its body had already changed. The golden eye in its forehead glowed brightly, shooting out dazzling rays of light, and from within its body, violent sounds of G were heard, as if even its bones were trembling. The distance of several zhongs, Xiao Hui crossed it in one leap, landed on the Kuei Nyo's huge body. Its body was already enveloped by a layer of golden light. Its body was more than twice its usual size, but this was clearly not the end. Xiao Hui did not seem to stop on the Kuei Nyo. In the continuous sharp cries, it suddenly leapt again. Its body again leapt into the air. This time it leapt towards the stone pillar. And this time, while gliding in the air, Xiao Hui's body changed again. From the depths of the golden light, a layer of strange red light suddenly surged out, instantly intertwining with the golden light, a sound like thunder and wind howling. The 3-eyed spiritual monkey's body expanded. Like the legendary metamorphosis, it had transformed into an overzhong's huge monkey, 3 eyes red like blood, sharp fangs protruding from its mouth, awe-inspiring, its baleful aura surging. Pooh! A loud sound. Xiao Hui, who had transformed into a huge beast, pounced onto the stone pillar. The entire huge stone pillar shook incessantly. At the same time, Xiao Hui did not hesitate, roared unceasingly, and quickly climbed up. The several zhong's tall stone pillar, right now in between the huge monkey's limbs, was only a short distance. In a short while, Xiao Hui's huge body had already flipped over the platform, landed on the ground with a loud crash, looked up at the hidden dragon cauldron floating in the air. The huge monkey beat its chest with its hands, raised its head, and loudly shouted, "Frowny face ho!" This sound was shocking. With one roar, it felt as if the weather had changed. The silence in the huge cave was finally completely broken. The roar traveled far. The dark red light in the air trembled. The circle of light on the hidden dragon cauldron also trembled, following which those rays of red light, as if they had intelligence, slowly turned over. Facing this strange formation and unknown object, Xiao Hui bared its teeth, its face full of ferocity, raised its head and roared. The next moment, both of its legs suddenly stomped on the ground. In that instant, its huge monkey body soared into the air, a distance of several zhongs. The huge monkey flew up with a loud rumble. Its power was terrifying. Halfway, the red figures all retreated. It looked like it was about to hit the hidden dragon cauldron. Just that the 4 divinities' blood formation was after all not to be underestimated. When the hidden dragon cauldron was about to hit, a layer of dark red like blood suddenly appeared around it. Xiao Hui's huge body collided with this layer of light. Such a huge force was turned into nothingness. It could not advance an inch and fell back again. Chapter 480. And immediately after, the 4 divinities' blood formation had already started its counterattack. In the air, numerous dark red figures gathered over. Looking from afar, the hidden dragon cauldron looked like a strange red sun, surrounded by tens of thousands of red lights, forming an enormous light screen. And on the light screen, several hundred red protrusions gradually appeared, each 3 chi square. The next moment, sounds of explosions instantly filled the entire cave. These several hundred red protrusions exploded at the same time. From within shot out strange round objects like blood bubbles, like rain falling from the sky, like a storm shot toward Xiao Hui's falling body. Xiao Hui howled to the sky. Its howl like thunder. The golden red light around its body became even hotter. Once its body landed, it flipped out. Its movements were extremely agile, almost weightless. The strange objects that shot down from the sky smashed onto the ground of the platform one after another. In an instant, the hard rock ground was corroded and large holes were formed. Strange hissing sounds were heard, and it was hair-raising. This storm-like attack had just ended. Without waiting for Xiao Hui to catch its breath, the terrifying light screen in the air changed again. On the enormous red light screen, another several protrusions protruded out, but this time each protrusion was 5 zhongs large and extremely fast. Without waiting for Xiao Hui to react, those new protrusions had already exploded again. What burst out from within were not the round, corrosive monsters, but blood-red skeletons. Some wielding swords, some spitting venom, some spitting fire, some spitting ice, etc. monsters, roaring and pouncing down from the sky, brandishing their fangs and claws at Xiao Hui. This terrifying scene was like hell. Right now in the enormous cave the wind was howling. The blood in the blood pool was also surging incessantly. The 4 spiritual beasts seemed to be extremely enraged. All of them raised their heads and howled, howling again and again. On the platform, several gigantic skeletons pounced down together, but Xiao Hui, facing such a scene, did not back down. Both of its hands clenched in a fist and pounded its chest, opened its mouth, and with a loud cry, it did not retreat and instead advanced, charged head-on towards the skeleton army that was charging over like tidewater, turned into a gray gigantic figure, and instantly charged into the blood-red formation. Deafening roar like thunder, tearing apart the mortal world. Xiao Hui charged into the group of skeletons, dashed left and killed right. Its huge hands waved wildly. Immediately, a few skeletons in front of it were sent flying. A skeleton in front of it was about to swing its blade over. Xiao Hui punched out, forcefully deflecting the blade onto the skull of the skeleton. At the same time it kicked out, dong. The skeleton was kicked far away, flying out of the platform, falling into the blood pool. The surrounding skeletons continued to howl, one after another surrounded, as if they did not know fear. All kinds of vicious moves, for a moment from all directions, pounced on Xiao Hui's huge body. In just a short while, Xiao Hui's gray fur had already burned 5, 6 wounds, some of which had already turned black. Obviously, it was highly toxic. Under the intense pain, the giant monkey seemed to have become even more ferocious. It turned around and struck out with its palm. Like the rumbling of thunder and lightning, a huge gust of wind swept past. Under the loud, rumbling sound, the heads of the 3 skeletons fell to the ground. They even spun a few rounds on the ground. The remaining headless bodies rushed forward a few steps before collapsing. After this round, Xiao Hui was incomparably ferocious, had already crippled more than half of the skeletons, but there were also quite a number of wounds on its body. Just that these wounds seemed to incite Xiao Hui's ferociousness. The eye on its forehead glowed brightly. With a loud roar, it charged towards the remaining skeletons again. Those skeletons also charged forward without fear of death. Xiao Hui charged into the formation, lifted its leg, and kicked the skeleton beside it into pieces, following which a sudden pain from its back. A skeleton wielding a huge saber behind it cried out continuously. The saber slashed deeply into Xiao Hui's back. Xiao Hui, with a loud roar, turned around abruptly. Blood splattered everywhere from its back. Blood splattered out. That skeleton seemed to be stunned for a moment and could not react. Xiao Hui's huge hand grabbed that skeleton with a roar, threw it far away, crashing into the hard cave wall far away, immediately smashed into pieces. There was no time to look at the result of the battle. The ferocious glint in Xiao Hui's eyes intensified, turned around and pounced. A skeleton beside it, holding a long spear, stabbed over. Xiao Hui did not even look, stretched out its hand and grabbed the spear, pulled it over. Unexpectedly, that skeleton was also ferocious. The spear in its hand did not let go. Its entire body was also pulled over, still trying to stab at Xiao Hui in the air. Xiao Hui was even more enraged. The long spear in its hand suddenly raised to its head. Like a windmill suddenly spun away. Woo, 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 the sound of the wind immediately sounded. That skeleton that was carried by the long spear instead became an extremely long weapon in Xiao Hui's hand. Immediately, several skeletons nearby were sent flying. Although the platform was spacious, but to Xiao Hui and these skeletons right now, with their huge bodies, it was no different than a round table, one after. Another immediately fell off the platform into the blood pool. Plop, plop, sound were heard continuously. The several skeletons all fell into the blood pool. Most of them were still struggling, looked like they still wanted to complete their mission and return to the platform to fight to the death with that ferocious monkey. Just that before they could stop in the blood pool, suddenly a few huge figures had already appeared in front of them. Right now, the four divinities' blood formation was busy fighting with Xiao Hui. The dark red light shield on the four spiritual beasts had already been withdrawn. Although these spiritual beasts were already depleted of spiritual energy, but they were tyrannical spiritual beasts that had lived for thousands of years. How could they be ordinary? Pa 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 pa. Crisp sounds rang out incessantly. Although the four great spirit beasts couldn't look down on the skeletons like they used to, their huge bodies were still there. They directly approached the skeletons and crushed more than half of the skeletons. These few days, these spiritual beasts had really been bullied hard. The anger in their hearts was not a small matter. After suppressing and suppressing, until 7, 8 times, they were panting as if the hatred was still not vented. And one or two of the skeletons who had luckily fallen further away were about to paddle away when those spiritual beasts suddenly turned their heads. One by one opened their ferocious mouths and directly bit them, swallowed them whole. And the few spiritual beasts in the blood pool spat out the resentment in their hearts. The fierce battle on the platform also continued. Several skeletons were beaten down. On the platform, there were only 3 or 4 skeletons left, unceasingly hacking at Xiao Hui. But to Xiao Hui, these were even less of a problem. It pounced forward, smashed and kicked. Immediately a few of them were crippled. Only one skeleton was still ferociously pouncing over. Xiao Hui's ferocious nature was aroused. It did not even look at the chopping saber. With a loud roar pounced over, knocked the skeleton down with one palm, opened its big mouth and bit on the skull. Its sharp fangs also pierced in. That skull shook a few times and immediately shattered. Xiao Hui stood up, looked around, extremely pleased. It raised its head to the hidden dragon cauldron in the sky and roared loudly. Both of its hands clenched into fists and pounded its chest, extremely savage. The four divinities' blood formation in the air did not expect Xiao Hui to be so strong. Pause for that moment, but then the red light screen lit up again. This time the light was restrained. The red light on the hidden dragon cauldron slowly circulated. The evil face on the ancient cauldron suddenly flashed its eyes, as if it came alive, its ferocious state indescribable. Just that although the hidden dragon cauldron's ferocious energy flourished, but the Qian Kun lock, which was like a light dagger tightly nailed onto the evil face, did not seem to be moved at all. No matter how the red light from the hidden dragon cauldron attacked, it was still like a nail piercing into the evil demon's forehead, causing the surrounding blood to be unable to gather. Just when the hidden dragon cauldron's red light counterattacked, the atmosphere of the great battle had a short moment of respite. Xiao Hui's huge body stood on the platform, roared loudly at the hidden dragon cauldron floating in the air, intending to provoke it, who knew that the hidden dragon cauldron suddenly became silent, without any reaction. Xiao Hui stared for a while. The golden eye on its forehead glimmered. Suddenly its body paused, as if it saw something. With a low roar, casually grabbed a skull beside it, and threw it towards the hidden dragon cauldron in the air. The skull had just reached the hidden dragon cauldron, and just like the last time, when Xiao Hui attacked, it was blocked by a layer of red light screen. Xiao Hui roared again and again on the ground, picked up the scattered bones, and unceasingly threw them towards the hidden dragon cauldron. The sharp whistling sound was incessant. The sound became sharper and sharper. Xiao Hui's strength after transformation was so powerful. Although the hidden dragon cauldron's light shield in the air was stable, but for some reason, it seemed that the cauldron's spiritual energy was mostly retracted to deal with that small light pillar. The outer light shield did not move at all at the beginning, but later on it started to sway. Xiao Hui, who was standing below, saw it clearly. Immediately its confidence was boosted. It howled again and again. Immediately the broken bones were like rain, thrown up from below. heavily hitting that dark red light screen. Ever since the Four Divinities blood formation was set up, most likely it had never been in such a wretched state, especially when facing the enemy. It was actually a monkey, although Xiao Hui was not an ordinary monkey, and the Four Divinities blood formation itself also had the Qian Kuan lock. But if Mr. Ghost and the rest saw this scene, they would definitely vomit blood in anger. Under Xiao Hui's strange bone-crushing attack, the Hidden Dragon Cauldron's outer light screen was struggling left and right, almost unable to hold on, and above the Hidden Dragon Cauldron, waves of blood-red light were still charging towards that evil demon face. Clearly to the Hidden Dragon Cauldron, it seemed more important was instead to attack that white Qiankuan lock. At this crucial moment, Xiao Hui, who was happily throwing things on the platform, was suddenly startled. The ground around it, without knowing when there was nothing left, so many broken bones were actually all thrown out by it. Xiao Hui bellowed, looked up, and saw that after it had exhausted all its food and ammunition, the light screen above had a chance to catch its breath and was already showing signs of stabilizing again. Xiao Hui stamped its feet and howled, extremely furious, suddenly fiercely smashed its hand on the ground. Its strength right now was so great, although the ground was hard, but how could it withstand the power of a ferocious monkey? Immediately rocks flew. Xiao Hui's three eyes suddenly brightened, stretched out its hand, and hit the ground wildly. Immediately in the rumbling sounds, rocks flew everywhere. Xiao Hui did not hesitate, snatched those big rocks and again threw them towards the Hidden Dragon Cauldron. The hardness of the rocks was even stronger than the skeletons and bones. The previous bone-shattering attack had turned into the current stone storm. The strength had increased by 30%, and the ammunition was endless. Like a storm, it surged and roared. The light shield that had just stabilized immediately became a mess. Under the bombardment of the rocks, after a crisp sound, the red light shield dissipated and revealed the true body of the Hidden Dragon Cauldron. Xiao Hui, who was standing on the platform, saw it clearly. With an excited roar, even the four spiritual beasts in the blood pool also became excited, roaring continuously. Xiao Hui did not hesitate, snatched the biggest huge rock next to it. It was the size of a human. With a loud roar, heavily threw it towards the Hidden Dragon Cauldron. This giant rock was as fast as lightning, carrying with it an unparalleled power. It charged straight up, and without the light shield to block it halfway. A moment later, it finally smashed directly onto the cauldron of the Hidden Dragon, making a muffled dong sound. The Hidden Dragon Cauldron shook violently. The red light on it immediately became chaotic, and the blood energy that gathered around the evil face also flowed back. The ancient cauldron, which was originally floating stably in the air, finally tilted a little from Xiao Hui's attack, disrupted its footing. But perhaps it was because of that, the red light on the Hidden Dragon Cauldron instantly lit up. The entire cauldron almost turned red. A huge and strange mysterious power finally appeared again, and as if responding to it, that Qian Kun light-locking dagger on the cauldron also suddenly shone brightly. The thick stench of blood instantly filled the air, and the entire huge cavern began to shake. Rocks fell from the huge cracks on the stone walls on all four sides, as if a demon had been awakened. The blood-red light exploded, and it stared ferociously at the savage, giant monkey from mid-air below. The tremors swiftly grew larger, instantly turned into a violent power, shaking the entire majestic Fox Mountain range. Far away from the blood pool, the Ghost King's set cave was once again shrouded in despair and fear. In the Ghost King's stone chamber, Ghost Li and Mr. Ghost abruptly looked up. The unprecedentedly thick smell of blood even filled their stone chamber. The ground was shaking violently, and after their initial shock, the astrolabe in front of them seemed to be suddenly summoned by some mysterious power, finally changed again. All of the ancient characters on the astrolabe instantly lit up. The gentle white light was so bright that one could not look at it. The speed at which the small jade pieces slid suddenly increased by more than 10 times. They whizzed through the center of the astrolabe like lightning. It was as if the fate of heaven and earth, in the blink of an eye, had undergone an intense change. Further away, in the cold stone chamber, The violent quakes and the rocks falling from the walls were not inferior to before. In this apocalyptic scene, Ghost King instead slowly stood up. A strange expression appeared on his face, like ecstasy, like agitation, like ferociousness, like thirst. His voice also turned low and hoarse, quietly reverberated in the empty stone chamber. This day has finally arrived. And at the summit of majestic Fox Mountain, Xiao Bai's figure suddenly shook. A tremor was felt from her feet. She did not sense wrongly. The entire majestic Fox Mountain range was shaking. Something that had never happened in 10,000 years happened today. A mocking smile flashed past her cold face, suddenly fluttered. A white shadow floated, swept down the mountain. Looking at the direction, it was the entrance to the Ghost King Sect Cave. Chapter 481. The ground was shaking violently. The surrounding rocks started to fall, and the astrolabe released thousands of resplendent lights, illuminating the entire Ghost King stone chamber. In the air, the pungent smell of blood assaulted the nostrils. The strong smell almost made one feel as if one was immersed in a sea of blood. Ghostly did not know why this sudden change happened, but after the initial shock, he suddenly realized, turned and shouted, "Xiao Hui!" His shout came from afar, and not long after, the echo of his shout came from the stone chamber. Then, it was suppressed by an even more violent tremor. Amidst the rumbling, the dust above his head scattered in all directions, and the falling stones became bigger and bigger. But there was no reply. That familiar cries did not come over. Anxiety surfaced on Ghost Lee's face. After a slight hesitation, his eyes were already staring at the inner room. Mr. Ghost had also moved over. The black veil made it hard to see his expression, but his tone right now did not seem to be flustered. Instead, in the strange calmness, indistinctly revealed a sense of excitement. "Your monkey should be inside, right?" Mr. Ghost beside Ghostly indifferently said. Ghostly glanced at him. Without hesitation, his body moved and had already swept into the chamber. Then his body stiffened, stood where he was, in the empty chamber. That dark secret door on the stone wall was like a deep black hole, coldly staring at him. Behind him, a light suddenly shifted over. It was Mr. Ghost holding the astrolabe, which kept on radiating dazzling light. When he saw that secret door on the wall, he was clearly stunned. Seemed like he, too, did not expect a secret door to suddenly open, or maybe he knew about the secret door, but did not expect it to open. For a while he did not speak. Both of them were highly skilled people. After standing in the chamber for a moment, they could already sense that the source of the thick smell of blood was in this dark secret door. Ghost Lee's face turned cold, looked deeply at Mr. Ghost. Mr. Ghost's eyes glimmered. After a moment of hesitation, indifferently said, "Don't look at me. These few days, I have never left your side. I also do not know what is going on." Ghostly coldly snorted, although his heart was filled with suspicions, but right now the quakes were getting more and more violent, and the missing Xiao Hui clearly left from this hole. No matter what, now was not the time to pursue. He made a prompt decision, coldly said, "Let's go in." Mr. Ghost frowned, seemed to be hesitating and hesitating, was about to say something, but Ghost Lee's figure flashed, already dashed into the darkness of the secret door. He stood there silently for a moment, looked at the glimmering astrolabe in his hand, and then at that secret door, suddenly sighed, said, "Man proposes, but God disposes. Actually, let a monkey spoil the important matter." After speaking, he shook his head with a bitter laugh. His black figure also floated up, swept into the secret door. The passage in the secret door was narrow and long. Following Ghost Lee's rapid advance, the terrain gradually turned downwards. The surroundings also started to become damp, but the most disgusting thing was, the deeper he went, the thicker the stench of blood became. Ghostly was currently in the tunnel. The surrounding solid stone walls were also trembling violently. If an ordinary person were to walk here, they would really have the fear that the stone walls would collapse and bury them alive. But Ghost Lee's face right now did not show any such worry, only his figure moving faster and faster. In a short while, he had already reached the other side of the tunnel, landed and looked up. Right in front of him was the already frantically flickering red light and a long platform wrapped in red shadows. and from the direction of the platform, a faint but familiar roar could be heard. Ghostly's countenance changed slightly. That roar, he could tell, was Xiao Hui's roar after a transformation, but what exactly was in the red shadow? What kind of danger was it? Could actually make Xiao Hui transform into this life and death battle? Without hesitation, like lightning, like the wind, charged into the dark red light, and behind him, Mr. Ghost also slowly floated down from the cave entrance. After he steadied himself, he did not do anything but first look back. Behind where he was standing, one was the cave entrance, the other side was an equally dark passage. Mr. Ghost was looking at this other passage. He stared at that dark passage for a moment, then slowly looked away at the astrolabe in his hand. After that, the radiance from the astrolabe not only did not weaken, instead it became even more dazzling. At the same time in the halo, golden ancient characters kept appearing in the center of the astrolabe, lit up in the white light, and then slowly fell down, extremely mystical, like it was trying its best to respond to something. Mr. Ghost looked up ahead. That dark red light flickered chaotically and frantically. Waves of huge air currents surged. In addition to the violent earthquakes and trembling walls, it seemed to be announcing some great danger. However, in the face of all this, a smile appeared in his eyes. He took a step forward and walked toward the dark red shadow with light and quick steps. Ghostly charged into that dark red light. Almost at the same time, the red light shone on him. Even with his skills, he suddenly felt a slight dizziness. Although he had recovered in a blink, but the scene before him still shocked him. The enormous blood pool, the collapsed walls, the stench of blood in the air, were all within his expectations. At this moment, a humanoid monster that was formed from countless crimson blood chi appeared in the air. It was over 100 feet tall and almost filled the entire cave. At the end of the platform, Xiao Hui, who had transformed into a giant monkey, roared loudly without fear, but its size was too different from this giant. Most importantly, right now Xiao Hui looked like it had no power to retaliate. When that blood giant kept spitting out blood-like, enormous flames from its mouth, it could only keep dodging. That violent blood flame continuously struck down from mid-air, sweeping everything, wherever it passed. Even the extremely hard rocks melted. Although Xiao Hui was not an ordinary person, it also did not dare to take it head-on and could only jump here and there on the platform, dodging in the midst of the danger. Looking at its gray fur, it was already covered with cuts and bruises. Clearly it had suffered a lot. Right now, it was just forcing itself to hang on, struggling at death's door. And at this moment, Xiao Hui leapt up with all its might, narrowly avoided a stream of blood flame that swept past it. Even in the air, it felt a burning sensation on its fur, could not help but roared loudly. But it looked like this time, it still managed to evade. It landed from the air. Who knew that when both of its feet touched the ground, it suddenly felt a sharp pain in its feet. The pain almost penetrated into its bones. Xiao Hui looked down and saw that the surface of the rocks on the platform had already turned into molten rock. Both of its feet were charred and the flesh on its feet was exposed. This pain was no small matter. Xiao Hui's huge body tottered, and the blood giant in the sky did not seem to have any mercy. Another layer of blood flame covered the sky and earth. Xiao Hui looked like it was about to be smashed into pieces. The huge monkey cried out to the sky. Far below it, there seemed to be a few angry cries, but obviously it was of no use. The blazing blood flame struck down from above. Xiao Hui's 3 eyes also seemed to have turned into the red shadow of the blood flame. At this critical moment, suddenly a long cry was heard from behind, like a dragon's cry. A stream of green light, like a rainbow, streaked across the sky in an arc, like a sudden clap of thunder, like a flash of lightning, arrived dangerously. Instantly formed a green light shield in front of Xiao Hui. In the green light, a sharp glint flashed. A Taiji diagram appeared, glistening brilliantly. In a loud sound, it forcibly blocked that blood giant's seemingly indestructible blood flame. It was Ghostly who had arrived at the critical moment. Just that although this attack was blocked, but Ghostly's body shook violently. His vision turned black. Not to mention the light shield that he had conjured almost dissipated. His body also almost fell into the blood pool from the attack. Fortunately, his skills were profound. When his body fell, he used the edge of the stone platform and floated up, swept to the huge monkey. His eyes swiftly swept past Xiao Hui. Without saying anything, he directly grabbed Xiao Hui's body. With a low shout, with one hand, Xiao Hui's huge body was lifted off the ground. Xiao Hui cried out in pain. Its body floated up. Its bones made cracking sounds in the air. The next moment, its body swiftly shrunk. In a blink, it had already returned to its normal size, became that little gray monkey. At this moment, the blood-chi giant above seemed to have become increasingly angry because someone had suddenly blocked its blood-chi flames. Its target had also shifted to Ghostly. It opened its huge mouth, and with a bang sound, a 5-feet-long blood-chi flame gushed out. Like a fire dragon descending from the sky, it burned towards Ghostly. Ghostly grabbed Xiao Hui, placed it on his shoulder, shouted, "Hold on tight." Following which his body floated up again. His current movement speed was much more agile than Xiao Hui, also much faster, although that blood giant's blood flame was extremely powerful, but he was always shuttling back and forth between the gaps of the blood flame. Looked much more at ease. And Xiao Hui was also not idling around. It had reverted to its usual body. One hand grabbed on a Ghostly's shoulder, allowing Ghostly to shuttle up and down in the air. It still sat steadily. The other hand hurriedly grabbed onto its own legs to look, its face revealing a pained expression. ZZZZ, calling out incessantly, and then using its hands to fanning its own 2 feet, probably feeling uncomfortable from the scalding. But when Ghostly heard Xiao Hui's cries and at the same time saw Xiao Hui's movements, his heart instead calmed down. To be able to fan and cry out in pain, it seemed that other than some superficial wounds, it was not seriously injured. After slightly calming down, Ghostly's flying body became more at ease. Although the streams of blood flame were powerful, but their momentum was slow. In his eyes, it was nothing to be afraid of, and taking advantage of this opportunity, he started to observe the surroundings and that blood giant in the gaps between the blood flame. Deep below his feet, like an abyss, but the blood pool in the abyss was a strange sight, especially when Ghostly saw the 4 spiritual beasts soaking in the blood pool. He was immediately stunned. Among the 4 spiritual beasts, other than the savage candle dragon, the other 3 spiritual beasts had a close relationship with him. Unexpectedly, they were all imprisoned here. And in his heart, he suddenly recalled that Ghost King had exhausted the entire Ghost King sect's strength these few years. From the earliest Kuei Nyo 10 years ago to now, the 4 great spiritual beasts all gathered. So it was all to set up this strange formation here. His heart was moved, abruptly lifted his head, looked at that blood giant. A stream of blood flames struck over. The surrounding wind was like fire. Ghostly's figure, like an apparition, instantly flashed several zhongs away, evading it. That stream of blood flame hit the stone wall behind him, causing rocks to fly wildly, leaving a several zhongs large hole on the solid stone wall. Ghostly floated in the air and gazed from afar, saw that the giant's entire body was made up of blood-colored spiritual energy, the red light like clouds, steaming and rolling incessantly. The 2 huge eyes on its face glowed fiercely, burning fiercely like raging flames, staring intently at Ghostly. Opened its mouth, and another stream of blood flame blasted over. This giant's spiritual energy seemed to be inexhaustible, never-ending. Chapter 482. Ghostly dodged once again, but this time, a sharp glint flickered in his eyes. He did not stay where he was, but instead followed the direction of the blood flames, charging upwards at a distance of less than 3 feet away from the blazing blood flames. Shockingly, he charged towards the blood-chi giant. Xiao Hui crouched on Ghostly's shoulder, watched as it neared the terrifying giant, but did not show the slightest fear, instead excitedly cried out, waving its fists, with the spirit to fight to the death. The blood giant did not seem to expect Ghostly's sudden counterattack, and in addition its body was too huge. Naturally, it could not react in time. In a blink, Ghostly turned into a green shadow, like an arrow leaving the bow. shot into the blood giant body. As soon as it entered his body, Ghostly instantly felt a heavy pressure coming from all directions. His body instantly slowed down, and at the same time his ears were instantly filled with frenzied cries, like the cries of ghosts from hell, and his chi and blood roiled. In front of him was a blur of blood mist. Unable to see anything clearly, he frowned. A golden light flashed on his face. With a thought, a marvelous technique was born. His body's solemn golden light lit up his bearing grand. In a blink, the blood outside his body was forced back 3 feet. The discomfort in his body also improved. Unexpectedly, the surrounding blood mist changed again. In the vast red mist, countless human faces appeared around Ghostly. The expressions on the faces were joy, sorrow, anger, savagery, etc., like thousands of ghosts gathered, surrounding Ghostly. "Save me. Give me your life. Don't go and die." Countless noises suddenly appeared, like a flood swarming over. Thousands of red arms, stretched out from the blood mist, grabbed towards Ghostly. The horror could not be described with words. Just that this kind of ghostly, illusionary heart skill, to others it was a superb skill that had always been successful, but encountering Ghostly's Buddhism mind-calming skill, great Brahmin wisdom, it just happened to meet its nemesis. Buddhism's supreme supernatural powers was the great enemy of the ghost way. The surrounding thousands of ghost faces seemed to be surging with unparalleled might, but once it neared the golden light around Ghostly, they all made sharp cries, dodging frantically. A few who could not dodge in time were already burnt by the golden Buddha light. In a blink turned into ashes and dispersed with the wind. With such a great skill protecting him, Ghostly was even more fearless. His body charged forward, although there were countless ghost faces in front of him, but they did not dare to face him. All retreated a sound. He had already passed through the blood giant's body, dashed out. Boom! The blood chi giant let out a strange roar, as if it was extremely angry, and its huge body slowly turned around. Although Ghostly successfully passed through, the expression on his face became very serious. This monster's body was completely formed by blood chi. It was tangible, but not tangible. He had just passed through it. It seemed that it did not affect it at all. In this way, he could only take a beating and not fight back. And seeing that the monster spirit energy was so abundant, and the spirit energy in the cave was surging, Ghostly could clearly feel that there was constantly scattered spirit energy flowing into the giant's body. If this continued, he would only tire himself to death first. Just as Ghostly was thinking about how to deal with this seemingly invincible blood chi monster, the blood chi giant suddenly changed. The huge blood chi body suddenly collapsed, and countless blood chi spurted out, forming a thick blood mist that churned violently in the air. However, there was no sign of it dissipating. Instead, it became tighter and tighter, finally turning into a crimson blood chi ball about 10 feet in size. It was like a red sun, emitting tens of thousands of rays of red light in the air. Just when Ghostly was stunned, deep inside the blood ball, a loud sound suddenly burst out. A moment later, from the blood mist condensed into a ball, thousands of red tentacles shot out. Every tentacle was as thick as a bowl, more than 10 feet long. Blood chi steamed, dancing in the air. In an instant, the entire huge cave turned into a sea of red tentacles. The powerful blood flame, Ghostly could avoid it, but right now, facing the thousands of tentacles that were everywhere, even Ghostly could not help but felt his scalp go numb, his face changing color. From the initial battle with Xiao Hui, the corrosive ball, summoning skeletons, and then the blood giant, and now the blood ball with thousands of tentacles, the strange power and mysterious formation in the cave seemed to have endless strange powers. In its savagery there were thousands of changes, making one unable to not feel despair, powerless to deal with it. Duo, 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 duo. A sharp piercing sound. The tentacles covered the sky and covered the earth, charged over from all directions. There was nowhere to retreat, nowhere to hide. Ghostly's face was solemn. With a loud shout, his entire body shone with golden light at the same time, forming a light cover enveloping himself and Xiao Hui, at the same time his magical weapon Soul Devourer appeared in his hand for the first time. In just a blink of an eye, in a sharp whistling sound, the sky full of red tentacles swooped down, immediately encircling Ghost Li's light shield, not to mention airtight. Not even a bit of golden light could be seen. What reflected in the eyes were layers upon layers of red tentacles tightly bound together, forming a strange red ball in the air. Those red tentacles slightly wriggled, looked like they were trying their best to tighten, squeezing inwards, and the red ball that was surrounded by the red tentacles slowly caved in. The next moment it rebounded back to its original state, but the surrounding red tentacles again exerted force, again caved in a little more, just that the rebounding force seemed to be stronger, slowly bounced back. Just like this, it was like a heartbeat, but also like breathing. It repeated many times, and suddenly, an explosive sound came from the red sphere. A moment later, it turned into a loud bang. A large number of red tentacles seemed to have exploded and were immediately torn into pieces by the huge force, turning into red smoke and dissipating in all directions. Under the afterimage, Ghost Li's figure shot out like lightning, flew out from the air, and landed on the platform in the middle of the blood pool, but his body softened, almost lost his footing. Looking at Ghost Li's extremely pale face, indistinctly heard his panting. With his current skills, he was actually forced to such a state by this strange enemy. One could imagine the power of the Four Divinities blood formation. Just that the Four Divinities blood formation and the Hidden Dragon Cauldron were obviously not like that. Although Ghostly managed to escape, but the large number of red tentacles that exploded in mid-air to that huge ball of blood in mid-air seemed to be nothing at all. In fact, after those tentacles exploded and turned into red smoke, in a blink most of it was sucked back by that strange red ball. Such an endless cycle of spirit energy. No matter how powerful the person was, they would also be defeated at the mere sight of it. Just at the next moment, even more red tentacles grew out from the red blood ball floating in the air, countless of long red tentacles waving in the air. It was really terrifying. Even Ghostly felt a chill in his heart. Looking at more red tentacles covering the sky, making sounds, about to descend again, Ghostly already had the intention to retreat. This kind of ghost did not seem to be from the mortal world, not something a human could withstand. Just when he was about to move to avoid the red tentacles that pounced down like a storm, sweeping towards the cave entrance, suddenly the monkey Xiao Hui, who had been crouching tightly on his shoulder, gave a sharp cry. Its cry was urgent, as if it had discovered something, used its hand to point at that huge red ball in the sky. Ghostly was surprised. All his energy was focused on dealing with the terrifying red tentacles. How would he have the time to observe that red ball? Right now, in his haste, he abruptly raised his head and glanced at the red ball in the direction where Xiao Hui was pointing. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. He saw that in the deepest part of the blood-red sphere, a faint white radiance suddenly lit up. It was completely different from the violent and ferocious blood-red radiance around it. Almost at the moment when the white radiance lit up, the insufferably arrogant and strange red sphere monster also changed. It was as if someone had pierced a hole from the inside in an instant, and the red light rapidly dimmed. The red tentacles that filled the sky stiffened in midair and stopped for a moment. Most of them turned into red smoke, and the remaining half shrank back. The red sphere that was originally more than 100 feet in size also rapidly shrank. Those blood-red lights in the air rapidly rolled, with a strong frenzy, but helpless. Even at a distance, Ghostly could still indistinctly feel that frenzy and teeth-gnashing ruthlessness. The sudden change before his eyes caused him to be dazzled and dumbfounded. But as the red light in the sky gradually weakened, under Ghost Li's intense gaze, the demonic red cloud in the deepest part of the red ball was finally revealed. The blood-red light there was the darkest, looking from afar, so thick that it looked like blood was about to drip out, and that heaven and earth reversing white light was shot out from the deepest part of the red cloud. Although compared to the ferocious blood-red air around it looked weak, but it did not show any signs of wavering. On the contrary, around this light dagger-like white light, the blood-red light slowly lost its color, gradually dissipated. Ghostly even suddenly realized the earthquake under his feet and the surrounding walls of the huge cave. The violent tremors had also gradually calmed down. Only that bloody stench in the air was still so thick, not knowing if it was because of the blood pool under his feet was too much. The blood aura in the air was still fading away, and a red light was constantly emitting a sharp whistling sound as it rapidly passed by. It was as if it was extremely unwilling, but helpless. Finally, after the red cloud completely dissipated, the true face of the red cloud was revealed. An ancient cauldron with an ancient form, exuding vicissitudes of life. Engraved with strange inscriptions, the front of the cauldron had a strange, evil demon face. In the middle of the face's forehead, that dazzling white light beam was shot out from here. Hidden Dragon Cauldron. Ghostly immediately recognized this ancient cauldron was Ghost King's most prized and most mysterious magical weapon in the past. Ghostly unhurriedly turned around, his eyes retracted from the hidden dragon cauldron suspended in the air, looked around, the already dilapidated and full of cracks on the four walls of the cave, the strange and terrifying huge blood pool beneath his feet, and the powerless and in pain imprisoned within. The four spiritual beasts who were obviously under a mysterious prohibition, all of these, could it be Ghost King's doing? And that terrifying, strange power above his head, the formless monster, something that should not even exist in this mortal world, could it be that it was also summoned by Ghost King? This kind of behavior, other than the word perverse, there was really no other words that could describe it. Xiao Hui right now also seemed to have lost its usual restless nature after the fierce battle. Quietly crouched on Ghostly's shoulder, but its three eyes kept staring at the hidden dragon cauldron in the sky, seemed to still be fearful of that mysterious power. Ghostly with a solemn face stood for a long time, and then unhurriedly walked to the end of the platform, the ground below his feet after that intense fight. The fish in a moat were affected, the hard ground had long become uneven, everywhere big and small holes caused by corrosion or huge force. He stood at the edge of the platform, like Xiao Hui at the beginning, bent down and looked down. Xiao Hui, who was crouching on his shoulder, also looked away from the hidden dragon cauldron, quietly cried out a few times, as if pleading, begging Ghostly to save the Tao Dai and the other spiritual beasts below. A strange glint flashed in Ghostly's eyes, his brows tightly locked together. Just now, when he saw the four spiritual beasts in the chaos, he already felt something was wrong. Now that he looked carefully, he realized that these four so-called ancient spiritual beasts were all heavily injured. Their spiritual energy that they relied on to run rampant was mostly gone. Chapter 483. Ghostly had never heard that in this world there was actually such an extremely vicious technique of absorbing spiritual energy. It seemed like the strange thing was naturally the mysterious formation set up in this huge cave and the hidden dragon cauldron in the sky. He couldn't help but hesitate. This vicious four divinities blood formation, he naturally did not have a good impression of it. And among the four spiritual beasts below, three of them had a close relationship with him. Logically speaking, helping these spiritual beasts to escape seemed to be the right thing to do. But he was no longer the simple youth from back then. With a change of thought, he already knew that this formation was so powerful, not to mention that everything before him must have taken Ghost King's countless efforts to set it up. If he acted rashly and spoiled Ghost King's plan, wouldn't that be equivalent to falling out with him? Actually, if it was really only falling out with Ghost King, Ghostly would not have the slightest fear and fall out just like that. But there was still Bai Yao lying there a whole 10 years, thinking of Bai Yao. The light in Ghostly's eyes dimmed, sighed softly, slowly straightened his body. Facing Xiao Hui on his shoulder, he silently shook his head. Xiao Hui immediately became anxious, scratched its ears and cheeks, waved its hands, its face full of pleading, clearly wanting Ghostly to save the spiritual beast below. Ghostly frowned tightly, his face uncertain. His heart also hesitated. At this moment, suddenly a clear voice was heard from behind them. Ghostly and Xiao Hui were shocked, turned their heads at the same time, saw Mr. Ghost dressed in black, without knowing when, had also arrived at the platform behind them, and that ancient celestial magical weapon astrolabe, instead shone with extraordinary splendor, rolling like waves, surging and surging, forming a light pillar around the astrolabe, charging up to the sky, resonating with the mystical light pillar on the hidden dragon cauldron, and the astrolabe in the dazzling light pillar. Below it transformed into numerous pure white light petals, one after another connected together, like a lotus throne under the Buddhist bodhisattva, sparkling and translucent, like a crystal, protecting the astrolabe within. Above the astrolabe, in waves of precious light, a golden ancient word lit up, glowing brilliantly, floating and sinking in the light, but this time, the golden word did not dim down. Instead, it became brighter and brighter. As the golden character shone, as if responding to it, the light dagger that was controlling the hidden dragon cauldron also lit up in midair. Ghost Lee's heart tightened, took a step forward, and sternly said, "What are you doing?" But Mr. Ghost seemed to turn a deaf ear to Ghost Lee's words. His black figure was completely wrapped in the radiance of the astrolabe, a pair of eyes staring intently at the astrolabe. For some reason, he looked less ghostly and more solemn. Under the dazzling radiance of the astrolabe, Mr. Ghost's hand, like Buddha plucking flowers, leisurely drifted through the air, gently pointed at the center of the astrolabe. Almost following his pointing, another golden character leapt out, glowing brightly, gently floating in the radiance above the astrolabe. And Mr. Ghost did not hesitate for a moment. His eyes stared intently at the center of the radiance, as if searching for something. The next moment, he pointed 4 times at the center of the astrolabe. 4 golden characters appeared in succession. The entire astrolabe glowed brightly. The surrounding light pillar had already expanded to more than 2 times, and corresponding to it, the Qianquan lock light pillar on the hidden dragon cauldron in the sky also abruptly expanded several times and made light sounds, swaying nonstop, showing signs of breaking away from the cauldron. Ghost Lee's shock was no small matter. Even the stupidest person after the intense battle would know that mysterious light pillar on the evil demon face was the only thing that could restrain that invincible strange power. If this Qianquan lock was actually unlocked, the consequences would be unimaginable. Right now, he could no longer care about his feelings. In a panic, he dashed toward Mr. Ghost, loudly shouted, "Stop!" Unexpectedly, although his body was as fast as lightning. But when he was 5 chi away from Mr. Ghost and the astrolabe, he was bounced back by a soft but abundant invisible force. And when Ghostly was blocked, Mr. Ghost again pointed at the astrolabe. This time, he seemed to be tapping very slowly. His fingers seemed to be trembling slightly. It was unknown whether it was because he was nervous or because he had concentrated too much power. His trembling fingers reached into the radiance of the astrolabe and paused for a moment. After a moment, there was a soft, crisp sound, and the 7th golden word slowly rose above the astrolabe. This 7th golden character looked a little bigger than the previous 6 golden characters, and its color was also deeper. After it rose above the astrolabe, it didn't float up and down like the other golden characters. Instead, it rose slowly and was fixed in midair. Following the 7th golden character rising up, the remaining 6 golden characters immediately gathered over, forming a circle around it. Instantly, the 7 golden characters shone brightly, converged into a golden light pillar. Only the thickness of a finger, charged straight to the Qianquan lock light pillar above the hidden dragon cauldron. In the huge cave, which was still turbulent not long ago, right now suddenly fell into a strange silence. Everything quietened down, not even breathing, all eyes, ghostly Mr. Ghost, Xiao Hui, the spiritual beast in the blood pool, even that strange existence in the darkness, all held their breath, watching that was about to happen. Pa! A very light, crisp sound. The hidden dragon cauldron's Qianquan lock light pillar swiftly dimmed and disappeared, leaving a finger-sized hole in the middle of the evil face's forehead, and the golden light pillar from the astrolabe coincidentally shot into this small hole. After a moment, a bead slowly rolled out from the small hole, dark blue in color, landed in the golden light pillar. The golden beam of light slowly retracted and descended, and the mysterious blue bead also slowly descended, heading towards the astrolabe. When the bead was closer to the ground and could be seen more clearly, One could see that the blue within was like a vast ocean, endless, and a faint mist was locked within, slowly circulating like the rising and falling tides, the sun and the moon moving in the sky, everlasting and everlasting. The golden pillar of light gradually dimmed, and the 7 golden words on the astrolabe also gradually faded before finally disappearing. The dark blue orb that had been taken out floated half a foot above the astrolabe, and it slowly began to spin. The dazzling light pillar around the astrolabe quickly faded, gradually returned to the astrolabe. Very soon, the astrolabe resumed its original appearance, floating in the air, only emitting a faint, gentle light. Those small, star-like jade pieces in the middle of the astrolabe were still endlessly gliding. The only difference was above the astrolabe, there was a beautiful blue rotating bead, looking like the astrolabe was the vault of heaven. All the stars were only revolving around that beautiful dark blue star bead. Heaven and earth's truth, billions of years of time, seemed to at this moment faintly revealed in this small astrolabe. In the cave, silence, as if everyone was stunned by this magnificent and magical scene, just that this silence only lasted for a moment. Boom! An indescribable loud roar brought with it the ecstasy of thousands of years since ancient times. Endless blood light suddenly appeared in this huge cave. Every place was filled with thick blood energy. Every corner was filled with whistling red light. The thick smell of blood that could not be dispelled soared into the sky. The hidden dragon cauldron floating high in the sky. Countless blood energy crazily surged towards it. On the ancient cauldron, the pale, mysterious inscriptions lit up one by one with a strange rhythm and turned into blood-red characters. A mysterious and demonic voice sounded in the air, like an old and lonely ancient demon spirit reciting a poem that had been forgotten for thousands of years. Red, blood-red color, like a tide, spread over the entire hidden dragon cauldron, turning it into a shining red monster. Finally, all of the blood energy surrounded the demonic face on the front of the ancient cauldron, starting from the chin, bit by bit corroding upwards. Red lips drowned the nose, swallowed the eyes. In the end, it was as if all the blood chi was roaring at the same time. The entire hidden dragon cauldron also trembled. All the violent bloodlight shadows were roaring at the same time in the huge cave. The ear-piercing roars were endless. The blood in the pool of blood started to boil. The ground shook. Rocks fell like rain. Blood energy surged like an unstoppable flood, permeated through the cave where the little blue pearl was, dyed the entire demonic face red. Rumble. Majestic Fox Mountain, the weather changed. Divine thunder descended from the sky, exploded at the peak of the mountain. A strong gale blew, blowing away the huge rocks and dust. Desolate heaven and earth, a desolate and austere scene. In the cold stone room in the majestic Fox Mountain cave, the ground and walls shook violently again, rocks falling one after another, but Ghost King seemed to not feel it. Right now, his eyes had already turned completely blood red, extremely strange. Amidst the trembling stone room and the falling rocks, he slowly raised his right hand and looked at it. At the center of his right palm, a blood-red inscription appeared clearly on the flesh and blood. It was shaped like an ancient cauldron, bold and powerful, and carried a hint of strangeness. Ghost King stared intently at the cauldron-shaped inscription. After a moment, he slowly laughed. His laughter was filled with ruthlessness, carrying some madness, even hysteria. Succeeded, finally succeeded. Ah! He panted deeply. His voice had long become hoarse. The muscles on his face contorted, his face as red as blood, looking extremely strange. Suddenly, he clenched his right hand into a fist. In an instant, a powerful force burst forth from his body. One could almost see tiny blood-red lights jumping around his hand like tiny lightning bolts. The surrounding stone walls also seemed to be pulled by a huge force. In an instant, a large portion of them collapsed, and rocks flew everywhere. Ha 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 ha! Ha 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 ha! In the wild laughter, with madness and complacency, Ghost King walked towards the entrance of the stone room. Just out at the entrance, he suddenly stopped. In the madness and ruthlessness on his face, a trace of hesitation suddenly appeared. His body moved slightly, as if he wanted to turn around to look at something. Behind him was Bai Yao's quietly lying body. However, in that short moment of hesitation, Ghost King still did not turn back. The huge hard stone door in front of him suddenly split into pieces and flew out in a violent earthquake and flying rocks. With wild determination, Ghost King strode out of the cold stone room. Rumble. The violent tremors continued to make strange sounds of collision. The falling rocks became bigger and bigger, as if about to swallow this place. That frail green figure lay quietly on the stone platform, lonely and quiet, with a tinge of sadness. Ding! Ding! The clear sound of a bell quietly echoed in this stone room. However, it was quickly drowned out by the even louder sounds of falling rocks and collapsing rocks. Chapter 484. On the platform of the blood pool, Ghost Lee and Mr. Ghost both looked up at the hidden dragon cauldron suspended in the air, but their expressions were completely different. Ghost Lee's eyes behind the veil were filled with shock and astonishment. Mr. Ghost's eyes behind the veil were filled with ecstasy. After losing the heaven and earth lock, the last and most important shackle, the mysterious power on the hidden dragon cauldron seemed to have completely revived. The dark red blood energy surged and churned crazily, and the demon face seemed to have gained life. Light flowed, and a pair of blood-red eyes seemed to have intelligence as they trembled slightly. A formless but terrifying sense of oppression emanated from the air, causing one to be unable to breathe. Ghostly recovered from the shock, turned and angrily shouted at Mr. Ghost. "What did you do?" Mr. Ghost seemed to turn a deaf ear to Ghost Lee's scolding. His eyes filled with excitement and even some craziness. Walked a few steps forward, suddenly knelt down towards the hidden dragon cauldron in the air. Ghost Lee was stunned, looked in disbelief at that black figure. Under Ghost Lee's shocked gaze, Mr. Ghost opened his arms, loudly shouted, "Azura!" Boom! A terrifying loud sound rang out, as if a terrifying demon had been awakened from its slumber. It spread out from the hidden dragon cauldron, and the four walls of the cave emitted a cracking sound at the same time. Countless huge rocks crumbled and fell down, and the blood in the huge pool of blood below the cave also seemed to be pulled by a huge force. In the midst of the loud noise, more than 10 water pillars actually shot up into the air. It was strange and spectacular. On the hidden dragon cauldron, an indistinct red shadow appeared. That shadow was faintly discernible, but it was clearly twisting and struggling. It was becoming more and more obvious that it was about to appear here. Even from a distance, Ghostly could clearly, truly feel that terrifying power and the crazy, murderous intent in it. He stared deeply at that red figure. His expression changed rapidly. Suddenly stamped his feet, his body floated up, swept towards the cave entrance. Although he did not know what kind of divine being this strange thing that was about to be born, the great power contained in it was obviously not something that a human could resist. If the mysterious Chinquan lock was still there, there would still be a chance. Now that the Chinquan lock was broken by the astrolabe, Ghostly made a prompt decision to leave this place after thinking for a while. He was no longer that simple and hot-blooded youth, sacrificing everything for justice in his heart. Maybe he did not fear death, but there was something more important than death. The surrounding earthquake following the appearance of that strange red figure became more and more intense. And also, just now, an uneasy feeling surfaced in his heart. This had never happened before in majestic Fox Mountain. Would it endanger Bai Yao? Right now, that uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. He had no intention to continue here and decided to leave. And the people here, other than him, Mr. Ghost, was completely focused on that mysterious red figure, ignoring Ghost Lee's departure. Under the blood-red light, his eyes also seemed to have turned red. "Azura!" He raised his hand, loudly called out to the sky. Ghost Lee's figure swept over. Mr. Ghost's strange cries were still heard. His heart was also bewildered. For the past 10 years, Mr. Ghost was mysterious and unfathomable in Ghost King's sect, but his skills and knowledge, Even he had to be wary of him. Unexpectedly today, he turned out to be this strange. While thinking his figure was extremely fast, he was about to reach the cave entrance and leave this crazy blood pool cave. Unexpectedly, at this moment, a soul-stirring, heart-wrenching cry was heard from behind. The cry was sharp and ear-piercing, filled with fear, despair, disbelief, and sorrow. And Ghostly heard it clearly. It was Mr. Ghost's voice. This sudden change, one after another, Ghostly was shocked, involuntarily stopped, and turned to look. This look made his entire body shake, sucked in a breath of cold air. Mr. Ghost's black body was still the same as before, kneeling down towards the cauldron and that mysterious red figure on it. But right now his hands, which were originally raised up, slowly drooped down, powerlessly fell to the ground. A huge dark red tentacle, sharp like knives, pierced down from the red figure on the cauldron, like a huge sickle, pierced through Mr. Ghost's back, came out through his chest. The remaining force was still so great that it pierced deeply into the hard ground below. Mr. Ghost, within 6 chi radius, the rocks all cracked. That mysterious red figure used the terrifying sickle-like tentacle, nailed Mr. Ghost to the ground. Blood spurted out from Mr. Ghost's wound. In a blink stained the ground below him. Mr. Ghost panted heavily, his body trembling violently. The next moment, that merciless, enormous tentacle suddenly pulled up, retracted. That terrifying force immediately carried the already weak Mr. Ghost up, flipped him into the air. Blood splattered everywhere, streaked across the air, carrying some sorrow. Who would have thought? Mr. Ghost, who was released from the Chien Kuen lock, became that mysterious red evil figure's first offering. Ghostly almost subconsciously leapt up, caught Mr. Ghost in the air. The black veil was still on, but it was already dyed dark by the blood he had spat out. Ghostly silently glanced at his chest, and then turned his eyes away. That wound was so huge, almost cut Mr. Ghost into two. Such serious injuries, no matter what, he would not survive. Just a moment ago, the person who was still standing beside him, in a blink had become like this. Ghostly did not know what to say. Carrying Mr. Ghost's body, Ghostly landed back on the platform near the cave entrance, far away from that terrible red figure. Right now, Mr. Ghost in his arms was already gasping for air, just that in such serious injuries. Suddenly, Mr. Ghost quietly laughed. That laughter was filled with bitterness, filled with self-deprecation and helplessness, and his laughter only lasted for a moment, immediately interrupted by more violent coughing and vomiting blood. Ghostly gently placed him on the ground, and then glanced warily at the mysterious red figure in the distance. The red figure that was wrapped in countless balls of blood energy was constantly twisting and moving, but did not seem to have the intention to attack the cave entrance, not knowing if it was because of the distance. Ghostly looked back at Mr. Ghost, was silent for a moment, quietly said, "Do you still have anything to say?" Mr. Ghost panted heavily. The light in his eyes had clearly started to dim. His hoarse voice bitterly laughed intermittently. "I have nothing to say. This is all. Heaven's will, retribution. Ghostly's brows tightly frowned, his expression complicated, although he and Mr. Ghost had always been more hostile than friendly. But at this moment, when Mr. Ghost was dying, his mood suddenly became complicated. He wanted to say something to comfort him, but could not think of any suitable words to comfort Mr. Ghost. Just when the heavily injured Mr. Ghost's panting gradually faded, suddenly, this dying man seemed to recall something. Not knowing where the strength came from, he suddenly grabbed Ghostly's hand. Ghostly was shocked, looked at him in shock, said, "What is it?" "You go, fine." Mr. Ghost was in agony, his voice hoarse. Every word seemed to be torturing him, but he still endured, struggled to say his last words to Ghostly. Even if Ghostly had a heart of stone, his countenance also changed, solemnly said, "Tell me, who do you want me to find?" "Find Xiao Huan." Ghostly's body shook. No matter what, he would never expect Mr. Ghost to suddenly say such words before his death. With a disbelieving tone, asked in shock, "Find Xiao Huan? Find her for what?" Mr. Ghost's grip on Ghostly's hand slowly weakened, but he still struggled to speak word by word. "Ask to save." After saying the word save, Mr. Ghost seemed to have exhausted all his strength. The light in his eyes dimmed. His entire body also slowly slumped down. Even his panting gradually could not be heard. Ghostly and Xiao Huan's relationship was not shallow. He had always been very fond of this young lady. Felt like she was his younger sister. Right now, hearing Mr. Ghost's last words were actually related to Xiao Huan, and looking at Mr. Ghost struggle to speak. Clearly, it was an important matter, but Mr. Ghost looked like he was about to pass away halfway through his words. Ghostly panicked, leaned down, and placed his ear near Mr. Ghost's lips, loudly said, "Who are you asking Xiao Huan to save? Quickly say." Mr. Ghost's lips moved, as if he heard Ghostly's shouts, panted rapidly a few times, and then using a voice that Ghostly could barely hear, struggled to speak the last words. Save. Qing. Yun. Rear. Mountain. Towards the end, it gradually became inaudible. When he finally spat out an almost inaudible mountain, Mr. Ghost's body suddenly trembled, and then his body relaxed. His breathing stopped. He passed away. Ghostly was stunned for a moment, slowly placed Mr. Ghost's body on the ground. His mind full of questions. Qing Yun Rear Mountain? But what did that mean if he did not hear wrongly? Then Mr. Ghost's last words should be referring to Qing Yun Hill. Just that Qing Yun Hill mountain range stretched for thousands of miles, the mountain ranges undulating. Where did this rear mountain come from? Qing Yun sect occupied the highest 7 peaks, and each peak had its so-called back mountain. But to save Qing Yun's back mountain, what was it referring to? Mr. Ghost passed away halfway through his words. Ghostly, after a moment, sighed, glanced at the dead Mr. Ghost, saw his eyes were still half opened. He closed his eyes, quietly said, "If I have a chance to meet Xiao Huan, I will help you to pass on these words. Just that your words are without rhyme or reason. I'm afraid she won't be able to understand." After speaking, he stood up, looked up, and glanced far away. The red figure on the cauldron was about to reveal itself, its entire body red like blood, but its head was still shrouded in a ball of blood air, unable to be seen clearly. Ghostly frowned, unwilling to delay any longer, turned and was about to leave. Suddenly his heart pounded, his footsteps paused again. In that instant, a thought suddenly emerged in his mind, like an irresistible temptation. He turned and looked at Mr. Ghost's body again, on the black figure. The black veil was still veiled. Ghostly stared at that veil for a moment, suddenly wanted to lift that veil, see what kind of face was inside. Just that after a moment, he finally gave up on that thought, turned and left. When Ghostly left the blood pool cave, Xiao Hui on his shoulder was still quietly calling out. Ghostly was silent, although he could not bear to see the 4 spiritual beasts in the blood pool. But right now, the place behind him was really the most dangerous place in the world. Even with his current skills, Ghostly asked himself if he had any chance of winning against that terrifying, mysterious power. The surrounding stone walls and ground were still shaking. Although he knew that Ghost King was personally guarding Bai Yao and nothing would happen, but Ghostly still felt anxious. This was a disaster he had never encountered before, and clearly right now that strange formation set up by Ghost King was showing signs of breaking free. At least Mr. Ghost was the best example. No matter what, even if Ghost King objected, it was better to bring Bai Yao away first. Right now, Majestic Fox Mountain was really too dangerous. Ghostly calculated in his heart. His figure also sped up, swept past the path he came from. In a blink, he had reached that fork in the path. He was about to enter that cave entrance. Suddenly, his body stopped. He discovered that deep inside the dark cave, a red light flashed, and that red light was swiftly heading towards his direction. Chapter 485. Ghostly's heart was moved for some reason. He seemed to subconsciously. His body turned and flashed into another tunnel, hiding in a dark corner with his back against the wall, holding his breath, at the same time quietly hugged Xiao Hui, using his hand to cover its mouth. Xiao Hui was already intelligent, seemed to understand something, and immediately quieted down, crouched in Ghostly's arms, and did not move. The passageway fell into silence, but this silence did not last long. After a moment, a sudden whistling sound came from the passageway, mixed with heavy panting. For some reason, it sounded more like a beast than a human. Pa! A tall figure swept out from the passageway, landed on the ground. Looking from the back, that figure was Ghost King, but the person in front of him right now was completely different from the usual Ghost King. The clothes on his body were somewhat tattered. Looking at his limbs and torso, there was a strange feeling that he was a size bigger than usual. The Ghost King's body was constantly emitting a deep crackling sound. It was unknown what it was, but there was an extremely familiar scent wafting from his body. A thick smell of blood. Ghostly in the dark corner coldly watched that figure. Ghost King did not stay where he was for too long. After he landed, he looked around and walked towards the red light at the end of the platform. He walked very quickly, very anxiously, as if there was something he eagerly desired waiting for him in front of him. He did not even carefully examine the strange bloodstains on the ground around him. When Ghost King's figure disappeared into that dark red flickering cave, Ghostly unhurriedly walked out from the darkness. He stared at that place. A strange glint flashed in his eyes, not knowing what he was thinking. Xiao Hui slowly climbed up from his arms, sat on his shoulder, quietly called out twice. Ghostly was silent for a moment, was about to turn, but suddenly his body shook. His countenance changed greatly. Right now, this majestic Fox Mountain was shaking. The situation was strange. Danger was everywhere, and at this moment, Ghost King came here alone, and clearly there was an evil energy around him, very different from usual. But, Bai Yao, at this moment, Ghost King had gone to the blood pool. Who would be protecting Bai Yao? Ghost Li's face instantly turned pale, his mind buzzed. Where would he dare to hesitate? Like lightning, he suddenly leapt up, darted into that tunnel, sped away. Along the way, he kept chanting in his heart, Bai Yao, Bai Yao. You must be all right. The entire majestic Fox Mountain was shaking. This was the feeling in Ghost Li's heart. Until now, the duration of the earthquake this time had already far exceeded the past, and right now there was no sign of it stopping. On the contrary, the tremors under his feet and the surrounding walls were still intensifying. Strange collapsing sounds were heard far and near, making one tremble with fear. After Ghostly swept out of that secret tunnel, dashed out of Ghost King's stone chamber, that stretch of Ghost King's sex tunnels before him were already destroyed beyond recognition. Rocks were falling from the stone walls everywhere. The originally unobstructed passage had turned into a crooked path filled with potholes and piles of rocks. More and more rocks, bigger and bigger, were falling from the stone walls. Intense rumbling sounds came from the depths of the mountain, mixed with the earthquake, causing people to feel the unknown terror. As Ghostly swept out, he soon discovered from those interconnected tunnels innumerable Ghost King sect disciples like frantic and fearful ants, disregarding everything. All ran towards the cave exit. This sect's strict rules, at this moment of life and death, finally lost all its effect. No one cared about it anymore. The crowd gathered into a river. Ghost Li's anxious steps were soon blocked by the crowd. At this moment, everyone was running for their lives. No one cared about his vice sect leader title. No one made way for him. Other than people, it was still people. Ghostly, who was burning with anxiety, strode forward, pushed aside the bodies in front of him, and squeezed forward. However, in front of him, it was still people, and very soon, behind Ghostly, a large group of fleeing Ghost King sect disciples gathered. He was like an angry little fish in a huge shoal of fish in the deep sea, desperately struggling and pushing his way out. However, the crowd he was in was so crowded that even a few feet above the people's heads, he could see human bodies from time to time. Bai Yao. Under his feet, there was another violent tremor. This tremor was so strong that all the people in the crowd involuntarily fell to the side. In the midst of panic, there were cries of fear and loud roars everywhere. There were also cries of pain coming from all directions. Among the crazy people, someone fell and was trampled to death in pain and fear. Ghost Li's eyes were bloodshot, his mouth dry. His mind even felt slightly dizzy. Ahead, what was waiting for him? What would it be? Bai Yao. In his heart, he shouted with all his might. With great difficulty, he followed the crowd and squeezed through this passage. Ghostly turned at a fork. The cold stone chamber and Ghost King's chamber were quite a distance apart. Right now, he only needed to turn back along this path and walk to the end. However, Ghostly's body had just turned around and looked ahead. His body stopped. his face showed some despair. On this path, there were also numerous Ghost King sect disciples squeezing together, trying their best to escape. The path just now, although Ghostly was moving slowly, but he was still moving with the flow. Right now, he had to go against the crowd. Looking at the faces of the people who were almost crazed because of fear, Ghost Lee's heart sank. The earth quaked and the mountains shook. Strange noises repeated. People continued to escape in madness and despair. And behind the crowd, in that lonely stone chamber, how was that person? Was she hurt by the stones? Did she see a man shouting loudly in the crowd, with a kind of craziness similar to the surrounding people who were fleeing, desperately rushing against the flow, towards the cold stone room where she was inch by inch nearer? Rumble. A loud sound exploded behind the crowd. Under the violent tremors, a huge crack on the stone wall cracked like the skin of a watermelon, collapsing and shattering. One of the boulders, which was almost the size of the entire passageway, smashed into the crowd. In an instant, blood flashed and blood splattered. More than 10 people had died just like that, and it was unknown how many were injured. While they were shocked, the terrified crowd rushed forward with all their might. The path of escape was blocked by the huge rocks, and the terrified people behind the rocks let out cries of despair. Under the huge stone, bright red blood flowed, staining a large area of the ground. Despair pervaded the crowd. People pushed and hit that huge stone with all their might. However, the hard and huge stone was not what they could move. It still remained cold and motionless. The earthquakes and distant deafening sounds, carrying the smell of death, seemed to be nearing. At this moment, the person closest to the boulder suddenly felt a cold light coming from the front. A moment later, the boulder suddenly trembled slightly. Then, the trembling quickly became more intense, and a series of explosive sounds burst out from within the boulder. Rumble! With a loud bang, the boulder was shattered into pieces. Large pieces of gravel fell down amidst the flying smoke and dust. However, the crowd was overjoyed. How could they care so much? They lifted their feet and were about to continue rushing forward. Cough, 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 cough. A series of light coughs came from behind the flying dust in front of them. A figure seemed to be staggering as he slowly walked over. The dust landed on his face and shoulders, but he did not reach out to wipe it off. His pale face was flushed with a strange redness, as if he had expended too much effort. Ghostly. What welcomed him was pairs of surprised eyes, but no one thanked him. Before they could thank him, their minds were once again occupied by the thought of escaping. The crowd was stirred, and the people in front were already running over. The scene of the crowd, just now, was about to happen again. Stop! A deafening shout suddenly came from Ghostly, who was standing in the dust. The people in front abruptly stopped at this moment. Ghostly's so-called vice sect leader status could no longer restrict them. What could make them fear was only the same threat of death. The man with red eyes held the soul-absorbing orb in his hand. The sinister orb glimmered with traces of bloodlight. It was operating to the extreme. The cold, murderous intent, like the tide surged over, the same cold words came out from his body. Whoever dares to block my way again, the stone just now will be your outcome. The crowd was stunned. The billowing dust made everyone believe in Ghost Lee's danger, and his eyes carried a crazy blood-red glow, made everyone unable to ignore his threat. Quietly, the crowd made a narrow path for him, only allowing one person to pass through. It was too small, but it was already the limit. Ghostly did not say anything. He strode forward, squeezed into the crowd, ran towards the direction of the cold stone room. Ahead, at the end of the crowd, there was another person, waiting for him. No matter what, he must go over. He clenched his teeth tightly, and a thin line of blood flowed out of his lips unknowingly. He looked rather terrifying, and no one around him was willing to look him in the eye. Everyone avoided him as if he was an evil spirit. Just that Ghostly did not care. He just ran with all his might, pushing aside everyone in front of him, following that narrow path which seemed like it would be drowned by the crowd at any time, ran with big strides, going against the flow. In this world, how many people were worth caring for? Suddenly, from the depths of the ground, came the rumbling of thunder again. A moment later, another wave of violent earthquake struck. The stone walls trembled violently. Large pieces of rocks fell one after another, mercilessly smashing into the crowd. People crying everywhere in the blink of an eye. The violent tremors made it almost impossible for people to stand. People swaying left and right could be seen everywhere. No one knew who was the first to suddenly shout in extreme fear, recklessly rushing forward. A moment later, everyone did the same thing, completely forgetting all other dangers. The small path, which was already in danger, immediately turned into nothingness. Countless people flocked over, turning into a terrifying torrent, immediately enveloping Ghostly within, desperately rushing towards another direction. Ghostly's eyes were about to split open. With a loud roar, the murderous aura around him intensified. His left hand suddenly stretched out, like grabbing a little chick, immediately grabbed a fleeing Ghost King's sect disciple and pulled him in front of him. At the same time, his right hand raised the soul-absorbing stick high up, about to strike down, to kill, to establish his might. In the faint red light, the sinister orb glimmered with demonic light, illuminating that terrified young face. He was a youth in his teens, his face pale, his body trembling incessantly because of the extreme fear, his teeth chattering. Only a pair of eyes still flashed with light, that little bit of weak light. That was the remnant instinctive desire to live. That instant seemed to freeze the cold, murderous intent and the madness in his heart. The faint light from the soul-absorbing stick in the crowd, at the end of the crowd, who was watching from afar. The blood-red light quietly faded from Ghostly's eyes, replacing it. Suddenly were indistinct tears. He released his hand. He let go of that cowering youth. Suddenly, with a loud roar, the soul-absorbing stick, like the wind stabbed out, broke the stone and pierced into the hard stone wall beside. Ghostly tightly held onto the soul-absorbing stick, stuck close to the stone wall, buried his head deep into the darkness. The stream of people was like a surging tide, gushing past behind him. Countless bodies squeezed him, pressed on him, collided with him, and crushed him. However, he endured it without moving, as if he had transformed into a lifeless rock, silently waiting. That youth was swept up by the crowd, involuntarily surging forward. However, in that surging tide, he kept turning his head back, a strange glint in his young eyes. In the midst of the crowd, he desperately searched for that lonely and persevering figure. Just that figure very quickly disappeared in the crowd, could not be seen anymore. Chapter 486. After an unknown amount of time, amidst the chaos, the terrifying wave of fleeing people finally passed. In the dispersed dust, a figure slowly propped himself up from the stone wall, was about to step forward. Suddenly his legs gave way, almost fell down. Ghostly inhaled a deep breath, clenched his teeth, and finally held on. The clothes on his body, especially on his back, right now was already in tatters, as if numerous wild beasts had trampled over it. Even with his skills, his face was also extremely pale and ugly. But he did not have the intention to stop and rest. On the contrary, the anxiety on his face intensified. There were no more people before him. He moved, stumbled towards the end of the tunnel. Bayao. For some reason, there seemed to be some darkness ahead. He panted, ran in the tunnel. The surrounding stone walls were getting more and more damaged, collapsed rocks everywhere, and these reflected in Ghostly's eyes only increased the anxiety in his heart. Finally, he saw the entrance of the icy stone room from afar, but was immediately startled. His face paled again. Looking from afar, he clearly remembered that there was a newly installed stone door, but right now it was a pile of rubble and rubble scattered on the ground. Could it be? Ghostly did not dare to think anymore. He could only stride with all his strength. Suddenly, the moment he moved, without any warning, the strange rumbling sounds and violent quakes in the depths of majestic Fox Mountain instantly stopped. A moment ago, it was still a frenzied din. The next moment, it was a strange silence. The contrast was too strong, almost impossible to accept. Ghostly's body paused in the air for a moment, but still ran forward. In this sudden silence, in a long tunnel, only a lonely figure was left, speeding towards the depths of the mountain. And behind him, The deep darkness slowly surged up, rolling over without any sound. He dashed to the stone chamber entrance, grabbed the solid door frame. His knuckles turned white from the force, looked inside. This world was still, silent. No sound or scene existed. In his eyes, there was only the cold stone chamber, that empty stone platform. It was an empty stone platform. As if he was suddenly drained of all his strength, his body slumped down, the sky and earth spinning. The entire world seemed to be spinning and trembling. That only shout reverberated desperately in his mind. Bayao. Ghostly blankly stood up, slowly walked into the stone chamber. Because of numerous violent quakes, this cold stone chamber was already in a state of devastation. Rocks and stones were everywhere. The four walls were cracked, large and small cracks. Even the usually clean floor had long accumulated a thick layer of dust. Even near the currently empty ice stone platform, there were a dozen large and small rocks, a few of them even directly smashed into the stone platform. Everything before him seemed to have turned into sharp knives, fiercely stabbing into Ghostly's heart. He staggered as he walked, panting heavily, his body on the verge of collapse. Suddenly, his eyes swept past a certain place in the stone chamber, suddenly froze. The next moment, his body started to tremble. That was the most damaged corner of the cold stone chamber. The rocks that fell had piled up into a small hill, and below the pile of rocks, under a large rock, revealed a corner of green clothes. Green, a corner of clothes. Suddenly, he rushed over like a madman and threw himself in front of the pile of rocks. He pushed aside the rocks and dug with all his might. The sharp edges of the rocks cut his palms until they were dripping with blood, but he didn't seem to feel it at all. Finally, he moved the last and biggest huge rock, then he was stunned. Slowly, he squatted down. In front of him was a corner of a green clothes. Just a corner of a green clothes. His eyes slowly moved, looked at the surroundings of the clothes on the dusty ground. Strangely, there were many footprints. These footprints were big and small, but Ghostly clearly knew these things should not appear here. The cold stone chamber, in the entire Ghost King sect, only he and Ghost King could come here. The others who could come, like Mr. Ghost, were either with him or were not in Majestic Fox Mountain right now. Then in such a chaotic situation where everyone was running for their lives, why would there still be someone sneaking in here? The next moment, Ghostly's face suddenly turned pale, almost subconsciously. He had already thought of the answer. Hehuan Bell. In the evil sect, everyone knew that Hehuan Bell was the rare evil sect treasure, even comparable to Old Man Blackheart's sinister orb at the peak of the evil sect. In greed, could it be? Ghostly didn't continue thinking about it. His mind instantly went blank. Deep in his heart, something quietly broke, shattered. That was the last pillar that held his heart together. Thin as a gossamer, but carrying 1,000 caddies of heavy burden. What was all gone? Finally, there was nothing left. Like a dream, that green figure suddenly appeared in his mind. Her smile was always so beautiful and gentle. The surroundings became colder and colder. The chill assaulted from all directions. Only that figure was warm. That smile was the last warmth in his heart. Just that, slowly, the figure faded, gradually disappeared. Even the remaining warmth also slowly disappeared. The deathly silent coldness was like an icy tide from an unknown place in his memory. It surged over and swallowed him. Bayao. His last call in his heart was this name. The next moment, he fainted. His entire body fell heavily, crashing onto the ground, kicking up a few clouds of dust. In the entire Ghost King sect cave, right now, there was not a single figure. In the strange silence, suddenly, deep below Majestic Fox Mountain, an earth-shattering, deafening sound was heard. Rumble. In that instant, the entire Majestic Fox Mountain started to shake violently. A huge force fermented violently from deep underground. Everywhere the stone walls were collapsing, numerous cracks on the ground. And this time, in those cracks, a terrible red light seeped out. The stench of blood pervaded every corner. More and more of the ground, like it could not withstand the corrosion of that terrible force, started to collapse. The red light became brighter and brighter, bigger and bigger until the end. Even the entire stone walls started to collapse and fall down, falling into that red light. Terrible roars and crazy laughter, like a devil resurrected from the abyss, reverberated in the depths of the red light. Gradually, a huge and deep hole was formed. Red blood light shot out from the big hole, and around the edge of the deep hole, more and more stones on the ground collapsed, constantly expanding the terrifying deep hole. In the distant cold stone chamber, the stone walls were also shaking violently. Stones kept falling down. Some of them heavily hit Ghost Lee's body on the ground, but his body did not move, did not have the slightest reaction. Outside the stone chamber, the terrible force seemed to be walking over step by step. And at this moment, suddenly, a white figure appeared at the entrance of the cold stone chamber. It was Xiao Bai. Her brows were tightly furrowed, and her face was solemn. She took a glance at the stone chamber, and when she saw that the stone platform was empty, her face instantly turned pale. Then she saw Ghost Lee had already fainted on the other side of the stone chamber. Without further hesitation, Xiao Bai had already dashed over, pulled Ghost Lee's body over. What appeared before her was a pale and despaired face, cold to the touch, almost made Xiao Bai thought that she was hugging a dead person. She clenched her teeth tightly. The corner of her eyes glanced around and suddenly saw Ghost Lee clutching something tightly in his hand. It was a torn piece of green clothes. Her thoughts turned and already understood 70–80% of it. Immediately her eyes also turned red. Rumble, rumble, rumble. However, this cruel world did not even allow them to feel sorrow. Deafening sounds once again erupted from below majestic Fox Mountain. After a series of violent tremors, Xiao Bai suddenly felt the ground beneath her trembling, slowly caving in. Red light crazily surged out from the cracks, carrying with it an extremely scorching air current. What flowed beneath her feet seemed to be the hottest magma. Xiao Bai was shocked, lightly shouted, carried Ghost Lee's body. Both feet tapped on a falling stone, flew out of the cold stone chamber. Just a moment later, the cold stone chamber had already collapsed, fell into that terrible red light. But after going out, Xiao Bai's face turned pale again. The situation outside was worse than in the cold stone chamber. The huge crater was already expanding in increasing speed. Right now, not only the ground, the surrounding stone walls, and even the huge stones above them were all falling. Xiao Bai leapt and dashed between the remaining stones, occasionally looked down, saw the endless red light, extremely scorching. As expected, large amounts of magma were flowing violently in the red light. There were fewer and fewer places to land. The remaining bit was also quickly collapsing. Xiao Bai clenched her teeth, carried Ghost Lee's body, and dashed. At this moment of life and death, hanging by a thread, suddenly Xiao Bai felt a faint light coming from above her head. She quickly looked up, saw the thick rocks above her head. After a large area collapsed, in the doomsday-like scene of huge rocks falling like rain, there were a few narrow gaps where light from the sky shone through. Could it be that the entire majestic Fox Mountain was about to collapse, revealing a hole above? A look of determination flashed across Xiao Bai's face. With a heavy push of his feet, he leaped up from the last remaining rock supporting him and flew upwards. The rock under his feet finally collapsed and fell into the red shadow. There was no way out anymore. The scarlet, red-hot magma, like an angry giant, started to roar, slowly surged up, churned and surged below the magma. There seemed to be an enormous force supporting it. The next moment, the scorching magma exploded, turned into an enormous current, charged up. The white figure was in the middle of a crazy scene. Below it was a blazing torrent of lava, and above it was a dense rain of huge rocks. Little White was like a white bird, flapping its wings and flying in the wild storm, desperately flying towards the sky. Heaven and earth changed color. Dark clouds rolled. Once the tallest mountain in the radius of 100 miles, right now, majestic Fox Mountain, in a deafening sound and dust, slowly collapsed. The earth was trembling violently, as if that force, even heaven and earth, feared it. In the deafening sound, in the dust that shot up to several hundred jong high, the scorching hot, huge current of magma rushed out from the ground, spurted towards the firmament, And in this spectacular scene, beside that huge current of magma, a small white figure at the last moment finally flew out of that hell-like mountain pass towards the distance. Chapter 487. A white figure flashed past the horizon, landed on a small hill several miles away from majestic Fox Mountain. The faint light flickered for a moment and dispersed, revealing the nine-tailed celestial fox Xiaobai. She gently placed Ghost Li's body on the ground and then carefully examined him. After confirming that he was not seriously injured, she heaved a sigh of relief and slowly stood up. Her white clothes had many burn marks, showing a withered yellow and even charred black color. The most severe places, even a few small holes, were burnt by the blazing fire. Indistinctly her fair skin could be seen. Just that Xiaobai did not notice her body's condition. After calming herself down, she turned and stood up, gazed towards the direction where she came from. In the distant horizon, a huge, blazing fire pillar left an indelible mark in the air. Even at such a distance, Xiaobai could still feel the heat from the mountain breeze blowing towards her, and on that once majestic Fox Mountain ruins, in the gradually calming lava torrent, the strange red light instead grew stronger, dancing wildly in the air. Deep within it, indistinctly there seemed to be a blood-red figure, laughing hysterically. Xiaobai silently gazed for a long time. The expression on her face did not show any hatred or sorrow. Or it could be said, she was only indifferently looking at what seemed like the end of the world in the eyes of ordinary humans. Behind, a soft rustling sound was heard. Xiaobai turned around and was surprised. Ghostly was still lying on the ground motionless, but his clothes moved a few times, and then a gray figure crawled out. It was the monkey Xiaohui. Xiaobai looked at it in disbelief, and then smiled, dusted her hands, opened her arms, and said, "Little fellow, I didn't expect you to be so smart. Quickly come over." Xiaohui crouched on Ghost Li's chest, glanced at its master, scratched its head, its three eyes looked around, and then called out twice, jumped over and into Xiaobai's arms. A gentle smile appeared on Xiaobai's face, carried Xiaohui in her arms, used her hands to gently caress its head and fur, and then discovered that the monkey's body had quite a number of wounds, among which there were some that resisted. The flesh was torn, and the injuries were not light. "Ai." Xiaobai sighed softly, shook her head, carried Xiaohui and walked to Ghost Li's side, found a tree root and sat down, placed Xiaohui on the ground in front of her, took out a small jade bottle, with some pity in her mouth, said, "Xiaohui, you followed this unlucky fellow. You really suffered a lot." Xiaohui's three eyes blinked at the same time, and then shook its head incessantly like a rattle drum. At the same time, Zizi called out, actually with some anger and annoyance, seemed to dislike Xiao by speaking ill of Ghostly. Xiaobai rolled her eyes at the monkey, snappily said, yes, I know your master is the best." Xiaohui grinned, stretched out its hand, and rubbed its head, looking rather happy. Xiaobai carried the monkey again. At the same time, poured out a few green elixirs from the jade bottle, crushed them with her hands, turned them into fine green powder, and then carefully sprinkled the powder on Xiaohui's bleeding wounds. The elixir powder dissolved the moment it touched Xiaohui's flesh, making a slight hissing sound. In a blink of an eye, Xiaohui's wounds had mostly stopped bleeding. Obviously, it was miraculous for external injuries. Xiaobai waited for a while, waiting for the pill powder to completely disappear into the wounds. After a moment of hesitation, she stretched out her hand and casually tore a few pieces of white cloth from her white clothes and carefully wrapped the wounds on monkey Xiaohui's body. Throughout the process, Xiaohui was very quiet, did not move an inch, and allowed Xiaobai to do as she pleased, probably understood Xiaobai's good intentions. Very soon, Xiaobai had finished bandaging Xiaohui's wounds. At a glance, Xiaohui's chest, right arm, left leg, and the back of its head were all tied up with white cloth, looking like a heavily injured soldier, but also looked comical. Xiaohui also seemed not used to it, kept looking at its own body. At the same time, its arms moved restlessly, seemed to have the intention to look at its wounds. Xiaobai glared at it, angrily said, "Don't move." Xiaohui was startled, jumped back a step, and then grinned. As expected, it did not move again. At this moment, Ghostly's body suddenly moved, a low moan was heard. Xiao Bai and Xiao Hui looked over at the same time. After a moment, Xiao Bai softly sighed. The man was obviously still in a daze, but he was still calling out that name in a low voice. Bai Yao. Xiao Bai stood up, unhurriedly walked a few steps to the open ground, gazed towards the direction of majestic Fox Mountain. Behind her, Xiao Hui scratched its head, followed over, grabbed Xiao Bai's clothes, and climbed up like usual, sat down on Xiao Bai's shoulder. Xiao Bai's eyes flashed a faint sorrow, stretched out her hand, and gently caressed Xiao Hui's body. In front of them, that majestic Fox Mountain had forever disappeared from this world, leaving behind only a terrifying huge abyss, and the incessant flowing lava in the abyss, and that unbridled red bloodlight in the air. "Xiao Hui, what do we do?" Xiao Bai softly said, although she was speaking to Xiao Hui, but it seemed more like she was asking herself. Her brows slightly frowned, as if there was an inextricable pity and sorrow. Bai Yao is gone. I am really afraid he will not be able to live on. Xiao Hui did not speak, only stared blankly at Xiao Bai, its three eyes gently moving, not knowing if it understood Xiao Bai's words. Xiao Bai faintly smiled with some bitterness, turned around, looked at that man who was still panting lightly but seemed to have lost all signs of life. What to do looking at him like this? My heart also feels terrible, Xiao Hui suddenly called out. Xiao Bai listened for a while, and then gave a bitter laugh, shook her head, carried Xiao Hui down from her shoulder, hugged it in her arms, softly said, "Go home." "Sound good, but..." She glanced at Ghostly, shook her head, softly said to Xiao Hui, "Does he have a home?" When the words were spoken, for some reason, Xiao Bai felt a pain in her heart, blankly turned her head and looked at Ghostly's face, unknowingly since when that man's sideburns already had white hair. Some people said, the vicissitudes of life can be thousands of years, but there can also be vicissitudes in a blink of an eye, just that in this human life, who could say it clearly? Xiao Bai was at a loss, could not help but sank in her thoughts, until a moment later, she was startled by Xiao Hui's movements and sounds. She shook her head, gave a bitter laugh. This time, it was for herself. So many years, and yet she was still so sentimental. Then, she turned to look at Xiao Hui. The gray monkey leapt down from her arms, stood on the ground, and gesticulated, at times pointing to the north, calling incessantly. Xiao Bai watched for a while. Her brows gradually frowned. After a long while, she suddenly said, "You mean we are going to his earliest home?" Xiao Hui nodded repeatedly. Xiao Bai looked at Ghostly, saw that he still had a lifeless look, was silent for a moment, sighed, and said, "We can only do this. Let's go. Anyway, no matter what, it is better than staying here." Xiao Hui grinned. Xiao Bai stretched out her hand. Xiao Hui leapt up, climbed up Xiao Bai's shoulder and sat down. Xiao Bai then walked towards Ghostly, squatted down in front of him, quietly watched him for a while, softly said, "All right, let's go home." A white light abruptly lit up from this small hill, charged up to the clouds, with some determination to break away from that terrible scene behind. Without looking back, flew towards the north. The mountain breeze blew gently on the ground. There was still some heat in the middle, like a gentle hand gently comforting the wounded land. And far away, that huge wound, which was once majestic Fox Mountain, was still shrouded in the red shadow, facing all living things in the world, shook incessantly, like a demonstration, also like a wild laugh. Central Plains, Qing Yun Hill. At the foot of Qing Yun Hill, it was still a scene of all living things growing and flourishing. Everywhere was green grass and dense woods. Deep in the woods, melodious bird cries were heard from time to time. Although it did not have the celestial atmosphere of Qing Yun Hill's 7 peaks, but it had more human warmth. In a stretch of knee-high dense weeds, dilapidated fences and broken walls quietly stood there. This was once a small village called Grass Temple Village, but now it had changed with the passage of time. A breeze blew over, the green grass swayed, carrying some grassy fragrance. The white light slowly descended from the horizon, before Xiao Bai could steady herself. Xiao Hui had already impatiently jumped down from her shoulder, rolled a few times in the weeds, calling out in joy, looking extremely excited and happy. Xiao Bai's lips revealed a trace of smile. and then carefully supported Ghostly, leaned against a broken wall, and sat down. Right now, Ghostly had already awoken from his coma, but looking from the side, he looked even worse than before when he fainted. His face was extremely pale, and there was almost no trace of blood. His eyes were open, but they were empty and without any expression. They did not move, nor did they blink. His entire body was filled with a deathly aura, and he looked more like a zombie than a living person. Seeing Ghostly like this, Xiao Bai's face revealed some anxiety. In fact, on the way back to Grass Temple Village a few days ago, Ghostly had already awoken from his coma, but from the moment he woke up, he had always been like this, never changed. No matter how Xiao Bai thought of all kinds of methods, tried her best to persuade him, it was still to no avail. Xiao Bai sometimes even suspected her numerous gentle and considerate words of advice did not even reach Ghostly's ears. Even though she had some understanding, but Xiao Bai still did not expect Bai Yao's departure would cause such great harm to Ghostly. Besides sighing, she was also helpless. Even if she was a nine-tailed celestial fox, 1,000 years of cultivation, but towards this human's feelings, what could she do? At the side, Xiao Hui hopped into the forest far away, and after a while, ran back loudly, carrying a few wild fruits in its hands, ran to Ghostly and Xiao Bai. He called out and passed it to them. Seemed like it was very familiar with the surroundings. Xiao Bai turned and glanced at the gray monkey's side, took a wild fruit from Xiao Hui, smiled bitterly at it, said, "Xiao Hui, you're still the best. Always happy all day long. If your master is like you, then." She gently shook her head and didn't say anything else. She put the wild fruit in her mouth and took a bite. The juice was quite sweet and delicious. Xiao Hui grinned at Xiao Bai, again carried the wild fruit to Ghostly, but Ghostly was still the same. Xiao Hui waited for a while, seemed to know that Ghostly would not eat, shrugged its shoulders, placed the wild fruits on the ground, and then grabbed a fruit with each hand, sat down beside Ghostly, opened its mouth, and started chewing. It was afternoon. 2 people and 1 monkey in this dilapidated village ruins sat quietly like that. Xiao Bai did not speak again. Ghostly was still the same, naturally would not make a sound. As for Xiao Hui, after eating a number of wild fruits, leaned its head on Ghostly's thigh, spread its limbs, and fell asleep. Time, unknowingly and quietly, flowed past. The scenery in the sky kept changing. In the azure blue sky, white clouds drifted, one after another. A breeze blew past. Green grasses made rustling sounds, rustling clothes and hair, with some laziness. The sun went to the west. The sky also gradually darkened. Night fell. A round of bright moon had just appeared, still hanging in the far eastern sky. A few stars in the sky had already started to blink, watching this another night in the mortal world. Xiao Hui's mouth made a few low murmurs, turned over, and continued to sleep soundly. In its dreams, its face seemed to still carry a smile, not sure if it was because it always easily forgot its worries and sorrows, only remembering happy things. Under the faint moonlight, Xiao Bai quietly stood up. She raised her head and stared at the moon in the sky, as if thinking about something. After a long time, she turned her head and looked at that still motionless figure that had already merged into the darkness. She softly sighed and walked into the distance. The night breeze blew gently, and her white robes fluttered in the wind. She walked alone under the moonlight. Her voluptuous and beautiful figure was like a beautiful silhouette from ancient times as she floated away. This night, the moonlight was especially bright. Qingyun Hill, small bamboo valley. Lu Sueki sat alone in front of the window, her clothes like snow, clear like frost, reflecting her beautiful face, radiating brilliance. The moonlight spilled down from the sky, landed on her body at the window like water ripples. Unsure how many nights had it been, she used to quietly sit like this by the window, watching the stars and moon in the night sky. The clear light shone on the lonely shadow, reflecting the cold moonlight. Far away, sounds of bamboo rustling indistinctly came. That was the mountain breeze blowing past the bamboo forest on Small Bamboo Valley. Under the moonlight, the thin breeze also blew past here, quietly blew into the window, sweeping up a small corner of her clothes. Tianya, quietly leaning beside the window, like its beautiful owner, bathed in the clear, cold moonlight, watching the horizon. The moon slowly moved up to the sky. Lu Sweki quietly watched, between her brows, lightly locked a faint yearning sorrow. "Are you still well?" The almost inaudible whisper, softly muttered. The gentle moonlight did not even cause the slightest ripple, still quietly sprinkling. The yearning on her beautiful face seemed to deepen a little. Chapter 488. Suddenly, at this moment, as if she sensed something, Lu Sweki frowned. Her leaning body slowly sat up, her eyes glimmering, looked away from the bright moon in the sky, looking out of the house. Outside the house, not far away, was a small stretch of bamboo forest. Under the moonlight, the slender bamboos cast slender shadows on the ground. Just that right now on those shadows, there was an indistinct human figure. Lu Sweki's countenance changed slightly, stood up, coldly said, "Who is the expert? Please show yourself." The shadows of the bamboos danced. The figure in the darkness seemed to be weightless as he stood on the branches of the bamboos. After a long while, a sigh suddenly came out. Then someone faintly said, "Indeed, you are someone that I can't help but pity. No matter when I see you, you are always so breathtaking." Lu Sweki's eyes turned cold, looked at the bamboo forest shadow, but for some reason, the voice of the person who came in the middle of the night was gentle and melodious. It sounded familiar, as if she had heard it somewhere before. While thinking so in her mind, her face was still as cold as frost. Lu Sweki said, "Who is it?" A gust of mountain breeze blew. The bamboo shadows suddenly swayed, stirring up the shadows on the ground. A white figure similar to Lu Sweki floated out. It was Xiaobai. Under the moonlight, her features were like a painting, her skin crystal clear. A faint seductive look was indistinctly discernible. Her beauty was not inferior to Lu Sweki. Lu Sweki was stunned. She did not expect Xiaobai to come in the middle of the night. Asked in surprise, "Why is it you?" Xiaobai smiled faintly, said, "Of course it is me, why can't I?" Lu Sweki was silent for a moment, said, "Are you here to look for me? What's the matter?" Xiaobai glanced at her, smiled, and said, "It is so late at night. You are not sleeping, leaning against the window to watch the moon. I wonder who are you thinking of?" Lu Sweki's jade-like face suddenly turned slightly red, then snorted, coldly said, "This is none of your business. What exactly are you here for? This is my Qingyun sect, small bamboo valley territory. If you do not explain clearly, don't blame me for being rude." Xiaobai said leisurely, "Oh, really? Then I will say it. Actually, whoever you are thinking of in your heart, that is who I am here for." Lu Sweki's body shook slightly, looked up at Xiaobai, saw that although there was a smile on her face, there was no teasing expression, hesitated for a moment. Lu Sweki slowly said, "What happened to him?" Xiaobai said, "He is now in the ruins of Grass Temple Village at the foot of Qingyun Hill." Lu Sweki's body trembled, and a trace of excitement flashed across her face. Even her jade-like hands that were grabbing the windowsill tightened. However, after a moment, her face was suddenly covered with a faint layer of sadness. She said in a low voice, "I won't go." Xiaobai was startled. "What?" Lu Sweki was silent for a moment, slowly lowered her head, said, "Our sect right now is in chaos. Teacher and elders are all troubled over it. Moreover, with his current identity, if I go to see him, it would be breaking the sect rules, breaking the commandments, and even if I see him, what is the use?" At this point, her emotions seemed to be a little agitated. She bit her lower lip and took a deep breath, as if she wanted to stabilize her emotions. Who knew that, after a moment of silence, a wave of passion suddenly rushed out from the depths of her heart, filling her entire body. Her heart was hot, but she could no longer control herself, and blurted out a question to Xiaobai, "Is he still well?" Xiaobai did not speak, only quietly watched her. Lu Sweki suddenly felt a sense of uneasiness. A trembling feeling flashed past her body. She stared at Xiaobai, held her breath. Xiaobai was silent for a long time, then quietly said, "Bai Yao has left." Lu Sweki, like being struck by lightning, stood dumbfounded, her mouth half opened, but not a word came out. Her mind was ringing a blank. In front, Xiaobai indifferently said, Your relationship with him is also not an outsider. He is now. How is he? How is he now? Lu Sweki suddenly awoke, her face pale, repeatedly asked, as if she could no longer stand steadily. Xiao Bai was silent for a moment, said, "He is not well now. I have no other way. That's why I came to find you." Lu Sweki frowned tightly, deep worry written on her face. She who had always been as calm as ice. Right now her mind was in a mess. She panted softly, as if a heavy burden suddenly pressed on her chest. Suddenly, she abruptly raised her head, stared at Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai did not say anything, only nodded slightly. Voila! The window in front of Lu Sweki broke into pieces. A beautiful white figure grabbed Tianya, swept out, charged up to the sky. What sect rules? What commandments? In her eyes, there were only glistening tears and unsuppressible yearning. Charged up to the sky, left with the wind. The strong wind like knives blew on her face, but could not extinguish the fire that was suppressed in her heart for a long time, but finally burned fiercely tonight. How was he? Bai Yao had left. What kind of pain was that? 10 years, but it seemed that only she could deeply understand that man. She faced the wind and left, resolute and crazy, without the slightest turning back. In the dark night far away, was that darkness enveloping him? Was that terrible coldness eroding him? She wanted to fly, to go to his side, to be with him. Under the moonlight, there was still a shadow. Xiao Bai slowly walked to the broken window, looked for a long time, and then slowly raised her head. The moonlight silently spilled down, shining on her. She closed her eyes, slowly exhaled, revealing a smile. There was a faint smile with a tinge of bitterness, but there was also a tinge of joy. The bright moon hung high in the sky. The night was cold and sparse. The night breeze blew over from afar. The weeds in the grass-dimpled village ruins undulating under the moonlight, like waves in the sea. The empty night was silent. Only from unknown places around, deep within the weeds, low cries of insects were heard. In the dark corner, Ghostly was still maintaining his original position, leaning against the wall. Xiao Hui was asleep, leaning against his legs. The night breeze blew past. It seemed to feel the chill, mumbled, turned its body, and curled up, even its tail, clamped tightly, and then continued to sleep soundly. Suddenly, in the bright moonlight, a white figure swiftly descended from the sky. Her speed was so fast that when she landed, the surrounding weeds with a sound, with the white figure as the center, abruptly fell outwards. After a long while, they then slowly recovered. The white light dispersed, revealing Lu Sweki's anxious face. She swept across the ruins, saw broken fences and walls everywhere. Nothing had changed since the last time she was here, other than some empty spaces illuminated by the moonlight. Most of the places were shrouded in darkness. She did not see anyone. She stood there for a moment, slowly strided forward, walked into the ruins which hid who knows how many past events. Behind every broken wall, beneath every broken wall, perhaps there was a story of the past. There was once a family's laughter, sorrow, and sorrow buried under the broken mud and stones. But now, under the cold moon and cool breeze, there was only sadness left. Tianya in Lu Sweki's hand gently glimmered with faint light, bright and dark, as if it knew her master's complicated feelings. The white figure traversed the ruins. Suddenly, Lu Sweki stepped down. A small but sharp cry was heard from the underbrush. In this cold night, it seemed exceptionally mournful. Lu Sweki's face turned pale, her body stiffened for a moment. The next moment, a vole scurried out from the underbrush beside her. Its forelegs flew, and in a blink scuttled into another pile of thick underbrush. Lu Sweki was stunned for a moment, slowly heaved a sigh of relief. Right now her nerves were already stretched to the extreme. Things which she usually would not care about, right now could actually make her heart tremble. Just that, this sudden cry, although it startled Lu Sweki a little, but at the same time, it also woke up the sleeping monkey. Before it woke up, the gray monkey's ears were already turning. The next moment, Xiao Hui's 3 eyes all opened. Footsteps were heard from the other side of the ruins. Xiao Hui crawled up, looked around, and discovered that Xiao by that familiar figure was not there. The monkey immediately became alert, stood for a while, looked at Ghostly, but saw that its master was still expressionless, dumbstruck like a wooden chicken. Then, Xiao Hui turned and climbed up the wall that Ghostly was leaning against, looked towards the direction of the footsteps. In the darkness, the golden eye on its forehead slowly lit up. Lu Sueki had walked for a while, although it was not a long time, but in her heart, it felt like 1,000 years. Everywhere was empty darkness. Her heart was filled with anxiety. Right now, there was also a faint trace of fear. Could it be that in this period of time, when Xiao Bai was not around, he who was alone did something stupid? Her face instantly turned pale again. Her footsteps involuntarily quickened, as if she could sense the anxiety in her heart was about to explode. After she took another 2 steps, Lu Sueki abruptly stopped. On the wall ahead, a spot of golden light suddenly lit up, but that was definitely not a firefly in the night. That was an eye, intently watching her. The moonlight moved forward, gently shifted a little, illuminating the shadows. A gray 3-eyed monkey's figure appeared, squatting on the wall, its body strangely and comically tied with bandages. Looked at Lu Sueki. Xiao Hui. Lu Sueki's heart immediately pounded violently. Almost without any thoughts, she swept past. The white figure in the moonlight streaked a faint afterimage, like the last willow flower disappearing in spring. Xiao Hui watched Lu Sueki flying over, scratched its head, seemed to hesitate. Among the girls who were related to its master, Lu Sueki and Xiao Hui's relationship was the most unfamiliar. The other girls like Xiao Bai or Xiao Huan, etc., when they saw each other they would smile and hug the monkey, or caress it or joke around. Only this white-attired girl in front of her was as cold as ice and had never interacted with Xiao Hui. But even so, Xiao Hui also clearly knew that this girl had a special relationship with its master. Watching that white figure sweeping over, Xiao Hui hesitated for a moment and did not make any reaction. The monkey did not react, but Lu Sueki did. She anxiously grabbed the monkey. Under the moonlight, other than the monkey's figure, but that person's figure was nowhere to be seen. Her voice even trembled, said, "Hey, where did he go?" Xiao Hui was held up in the air by Lu Sueki. Although that pair of hands were equally fair and beautiful, but the owner of the hands naturally could not be bothered to be courteous. Unknowingly exerted more and more strength. Xiao Hui was somewhat annoyed, waved its limbs, and called out. But before the monkey could express its protest, Lu Sueki's gaze had already drifted past it. Behind the broken wall, in the deep shadows of the darkness, a shadow was sitting there without making a sound. "Pa!" The monkey that was protesting suddenly lost its support, fell from the air onto the ground. Looked like it even rubbed against one of its wounds. Xiao Hui immediately grimaced in pain, jumped up and made a face at Lu Sueki's back. Lu Sueki slowly turned around the broken wall, walked to Ghostly. In front of her was a body that seemed to have lost its life, a pair of empty and soulless eyes blankly opened, not knowing where it was staring at. The entire face was haggard. A faint smell of decay emitted from the body, making one mistakenly think that this was already a corpse, rotting from the inside. Dang! Tianya, Celestial's sword fell from her hand, gently landed on the ground beside. Lu Sueki did not even glance at it. She slowly squatted down before Ghostly. 2 lines of crystal-clear tears rolled down her fair cheeks. Xiao Fan. Ghostly's body suddenly moved, as if this familiar cry indistinctly stirred up somewhere deep in his heart. Just that after a moment, he returned to his original dazed state, like a tired bird, rather huddled in its little invisible nest, and refused to look out at the outside world, even once. Trembling slightly, Lu Sueki stretched out her hands and slowly cupped his face. That familiar face, it was the person she had missed countless nights in her heart. Her lips trembled slightly, choked with sobs, said in a low voice, "Xiao Fan, I'm here, it's me. I'm Sueki." He did not move, his face wouldn't. The night breeze was cold, gently blowing past. The bushes made rustling sounds. The gray monkey squatted beside, silently watching them. Under the cold moonlight, who would care about this lowly and insignificant corner of the world? that man and woman struggling with love in the mortal world? Drip, transparent teardrops rolled down her cheeks, landed on Ghost Lee's face. In the wetness, there was a faint warmth. Lou Swecky gently sat beside Ghost Lee. The place where she touched was as cold as ice. Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. On Lou Swecky's face, behind the tear stains, slowly emerged some determination and bravery. She gently hugged Ghost Lee's face in her arms, using the warmth of her chest to warm up the body that was about to lose hope and collapse. She hugged the man in her arms tightly and refused to let go. She slowly raised her head and looked at the sky. The bright moon was bright and clear. Xiao Fan, don't be afraid. It will be fine. Everything will be fine, she softly said, her voice gentle but firm. The moonlight, like water, spilled onto the mortal world, gently illuminating the pair of figures leaning against each other. Chapter 489. Divine continent, vast land, boundless mountains, central plains, fertile land. Right now it still looked like a scene of flourishing peace, not the slightest sense of the strange happenings in the desolate mountains in the southwest border. However, right now, there were two people flying towards majestic Fox Mountain where Ghost King's sect headquarters was. They were Jean Pinger and Taoist Song Song, who had secretly infiltrated Qin Yun Hill and secretly destroyed the Heaven Lock. After secretly destroying the Heaven Lock of Qin Yun Hill 4 Branches Peaks, they followed Ghost King's instructions and carefully explored the surroundings of Qin Yun Hill, delayed for a few days before rushing back. On the way back, Taoist Song Song was silent. Sometimes he hardly spoke a word for the whole day. Jean Pinger more or less understood Taoist Song Song's conflicted state of mind, but knowing was knowing. She was not a soft-hearted, compassionate, and kind girl. On the contrary, although she still smiled sweetly every day, but in her heart she looked down on Taoist Song Song. On the way back, after entering the 100 miles boundary of majestic Fox Mountain, after rushing for a day, both of them landed from the sky and casually found a secluded valley to rest for a while. This valley was not big. Between the mountains, a small stream flowed downwards from upstream, through the valley bottom and flowed downwards. The stream water was clear. Jean Pinger, after rushing for a day, already felt thirsty, walked to the stream and scooped some water with her hands, put in her mouth to drink. This valley stream water was cold to the touch, but very sweet to the mouth. Jean Pinger could not help but drank a few more mouthfuls, and then heaved a long sigh, turned and smiled, said, "Priest, this stream water is good. Don't you want to come over and drink some?" Taoist Song Song sat on a rock beside, shook his head. His face looked gloomy. In fact, ever since they returned from Qin Yun Hill, his face had always been like this. Jean Pinger saw it, laughed in her heart, but did not bother to expose him, turned around, used her hands to scoop up the clear stream water, splashed it on her face a few times, and then raised her head to shake it, felt a coolness penetrating straight to the bottom of her heart, indescribable pleasure. Under the sunlight, the crystal clear water on her fair skin looked like pearls, slowly sliding down. Her chest was slightly dampened by a few droplets of water powder, indistinctly revealing her soft and supple skin, looking seductive and beautiful. "Miss Jean." Suddenly, Taoist Song Song, who had been silent all this while suddenly called out. Jean Pinger did not expect Taoist Song Song to speak first. She felt it was strange. She turned and looked, revealing her signature coquettish smile, smiled and said, "What is it, Taoist Song Song?" Taoist Song Song's eyes slightly drooped, did not look at Jean Pinger's beautiful face that could turn all living things upside down, looked at his brows slightly furrowed, as if his heart was burdened with a lot of worries, hesitated for a moment. Taoist Song Song was heard saying, "Ghost King sect leader ordered us to secretly destroy Qin Yun's sect's heaven seal. I know the intention behind it. Evil sect." Halfway through his words, he suddenly choked. Jean Pinger looked at him with a smile, but her eyes seemed to contain some mockery. Taoist Vas Kalo was silent for a moment, quietly said, "Holy sect wishes to unify the world. Qin Yun sect is naturally the #1 enemy. Breaking their heaven secrets lock is even more important. But I don't understand, why did Ghost King sect leader ordered us to investigate all the towns and villages within 100 miles radius of Qinyan sect, and the commoners living there. These commoners are basically defenseless commoners. Even if they revered Qinyan sect, it doesn't seem to be enough for the holy sect to deal with them. Jean Pinger's charming eyes turned, smiled, and said, "Why? Taoist Song, don't tell me you have the heart to bemoan the state of the universe and pity mankind, and wish to save all living beings." Taoist Song's face darkened, said, "I just feel that it is all right to deal with Qinyan sect, but if you want to involve these innocent commoners, it is not necessary." Jean Pinger smiled and said, "Taoist Song, you don't have to be angry. I did not say anything." After speaking, she paused, after a moment of contemplation, said, "Honestly speaking, the investigation of the towns and villages around Qinyan Hill, it is indeed Ghost King sect leader's order. The reason I'm also not very clear, but from what I see, with Ghost King sect leader's temperament, he does not seem to be a madman who massacred the commoners for no reason." Taoist Song's face softened slightly, pondered for a moment, seemed to feel that Jean Pinger's words were reasonable, but he seemed to still have some misgivings, shook his head and said, "Even so, I still do not understand why we are to investigate those commoners. Other than their numbers, there is nothing strange about them. Those commoners, even if there are hundreds or thousands of them together, I'm afraid they are still not a match for an accomplished cultivator." Jean Pinger smiled and said, "We have all thought of this. Ghost King sect leader's heart is as deep as the sea. How can he not think of it? So Taoist Song, you don't have to worry groundless fears." Taoist Song sighed softly and said, "It is because Ghost King sect leader's heart is as deep as the sea. I'm unable to guess what exactly he is thinking in his heart, although common sense is so. I'm afraid he will suddenly." Speaking till the end, he seemed to feel bored, with a bitter laugh, shook his head and did not continue. Jean Pinger naturally was not the kind of person who would worry about the lives of the commoners below Qinyan Hill. But Taoist Song's strange attitude, she felt displeased. She did not even know what her future would be, and he still had the heart to worry about others. Could it be that these good faction fellows all had this temperament? Even if they joined the evil faction, they could not change? Jean Pinger shrugged her shoulders, feeling baffled by this kind of strange matter, turned and walked back to the stream. She wanted to wash her face before they continued their journey. She indifferently said, "Taoist Song, you don't have to worry. There is no need to think about these," for the word "for" had not left her mouth. Jean Pinger's eyes suddenly froze. The words seemed to be stuck and could not come out. Even her body seemed to stiffen. The stream water, which was so clear that one could see the bottom. Suddenly there was a patch of blood stain, the color dark red, following the flow of the water in the stream, slowly rippled. Jean Pinger stared at the patch of blood. Her face instantly turned ugly, recalling that she had drunk the water here and used the water to wash her face. Jean Pinger's stomach convulsed, a feeling of wanting to vomit. She stood where she was and looked at it silently for a while. Then, her gaze moved and followed the blood mist upstream. Sure enough, the blood stain was slowly flowing down from upstream. It was like a thin red line in the stream, stretching endlessly. Jean Pinger coldly snorted, strided along the stream upstream. Behind her, Taoist Song saw Jean Pinger suddenly walking further away, felt strange, said, "Miss Jean, what happened to you?" Jean Pinger did not answer him. Her pair of eyes only stared at the stream. Taoist Song frowned, walked over. His face changed slightly. He also discovered the abnormality in the stream. After hesitating for a moment, he also followed behind Jean Pinger upstream. This stream was not deep nor wide. When one walked down, the water level was not more than the knees, 3 or 4 steps, and one could reach the other side, but the water murmured, meandering. It was actually quite long. The two of them walked in the valley for almost an hour. Looked like they were about to walk out of the valley, but this stream was still not in sight, and that strange red line of blood stain in the water also continued to stretch endlessly. Jean Pinger and Taoist Song looked at each other, frowned. Both of them were not ordinary people. Naturally, they knew that if it was an ordinary beast's blood flowing in the water, 10 to 20 zhongs would still flow along, but if it was such a long distance, it would have long dissolved into the water and disappeared. Right now, the blood stain in the water was still coagulated and did not disperse. There was definitely something strange. In the mountains, the wind blew past the secluded valley. A strange whistling sound was heard. The forest swayed, making strange rustling sounds, adding a few degrees of eeriness. Taoist Song suddenly stopped. Jean Pinger frowned, looked at him, said, "What is it?" Taoist Song was silent for a moment, said, "I think we better not be meddlesome." Jean Pinger's brows raised, as if she did not expect Taoist Song to say such words, said, "Priest, don't tell me you are afraid." A trace of anger flashed past Taoist Song's face, but he still suppressed it, said, "The important matter is more important. Ghost King Sekhead has already instructed us to do something for a period of time. I think we better go back and report first." After speaking, without waiting for Jean Pinger to speak, as if he did not want to see Jean Pinger's slightly mocking gaze, he straightaway turned, rode his sword, and flew up, minding his own business, and flew towards the direction of majestic Fox Mountain. Jean Pinger watched Taoist Song's departing figure, coldly snorted, a look of disdain in her eyes. For the moment, she could not be bothered to chase, turned her head and looked at the blood stain in the stream. Slowly, her face turned solemn. Suddenly, in the spacious valley, a low roar was heard from upstream. Jean Pinger was concentrating in her thoughts. Immediately, she was startled by the sudden roar, quickly turned and looked. Ahead was a forest. The stream made a turn at the edge of the forest. The place where the roar came from was blocked by the dense forest. Since she was already here, Jean Pinger naturally would not ignore it. Her body leapt lightly. She had already quietly swept past into the dense forest. After a few leaps, leapt onto a tree branch at the edge of the forest, looked down. With this look, her countenance immediately changed. Taoist Song was flying in the air, deliberately slowed down, and waited for a while. Unexpectedly, Jean Pinger did not catch up. Taoist Song looked at the empty space behind him, couldn't help but felt annoyed. Although this Jean Pinger was usually polite to him and always addressed him as Taoist priest, but Taoist Song was experienced in the ways of the world, had long seen the hidden trace of disdain and ridicule in Jean Pinger's eyes. Or maybe Jean Pinger actually most likely did not mean to ridicule him, but Taoist Song thought so. It was no wonder that Taoist Song, ever since he betrayed Qing Yun and joined the evil sect Ghost King sect, his mentality had gradually become unusually sensitive. Just when Taoist Song was sulking, hesitating whether he should go alone or go back to look for Jean Pinger, a faint purple light shone from behind. It was Jean Pinger flying over. The brilliant light from her magical weapon flashed. Jean Pinger came to Taoist Song's side. The high-altitude wind blew her clothes. Just that looking at her now, Jean Pinger's face seemed to be deep in thought, totally without the usual smile on her face. Seeing Taoist Song waiting there, Jean Pinger smiled at him. Just that the smile looked rather forced, totally not her usual coquettish look, said, "Taoist priest, let's go." Taoist Song coldly snorted, turned and rode his sword forward, did not even speak a word. Facing this somewhat rude action, Jean Pinger's face did not show anger. On the contrary, she slowly followed behind. Watching Taoist Song's figure flying away, her eyes revealed a flickering, complicated expression. Chapter 490. That valley was still 100 miles away from majestic Fox Mountain. In between the mountain ranges were undulating, ordinary people. To reach majestic Fox Mountain from here most likely would need at least half a month, but to Taoist Song and Jean Pinger, who could fly on their swords, it was less than half a day's work. Just that when they flew near that mountain, it was like being punched in the face. Even Jean Pinger, who had been deep in thought, was also shocked, speechless. As they slowly descended, everything before them gradually became clear. That once towering majestic Fox Mountain right now had disappeared on the huge mountain. A huge abyss appeared. From afar they could hear the roars of scorching lava, and from that abyss shot out numerous strange red lights, shooting towards the sky, like the images of the legendary evil demons. In the air, a thick and pungent smell of blood permeated the air. "What's going on? What happened?" Taoist Song muttered, landed on the ground, and looked around. Within a radius of 10 miles around the abyss, It was shrouded by that strange red light. The trees that were originally lush with foliage, right now were all withered, leaving only withered tree trunks standing erect on the ground. The situation was extremely horrifying. Taoist Song Song looked around. In the midst of his fear, suddenly Jean Pinger's voice was heard beside him. She gave a soft sound, showing some surprise. Taoist Song Song looked at her, saw Jean Pinger pointing to the right ahead, quietly said, "Look there." Taoist Song Song followed her finger and looked over, was also stunned. The red light in that direction swayed. Several figures walked out from the red light. Looking closely, these people were all strong men. Their clothes and accessories, it was the evil sect Ghost King sect uniform. Seemed like they were all Ghost King sect disciples. Taoist Song Song then heaved a sigh of relief. Seemed like this majestic Fox Mountain had really undergone a huge change during his absence. But thinking about it, with Ghost King's ability, nothing could stump him. Looking at these Ghost King sect disciples, most likely Ghost King sect did not suffer much damage. At this time, a group of Ghost King sect disciples who seemed to be patrolling also noticed the two of them, turned and walked over. Taoist Song Song went up to them, loudly said, "I am Song Song, what happened here?" Jean Pinger did not speak. She stared intently at the red blood figure that shrouded the abyss like a light screen, and then quietly followed behind Taoist Song Song. Her brows tightly frowned, watching those Ghost King sect disciples who were approaching. As the two sides came closer, the dozens of people were indeed the disciples of the Ghost King sect. The leader of the group nodded to Song Song and bowed, but for some reason, his movements looked a little stiff. He opened his mouth and said, "Greetings, Taoist." Taoist Song Song frowned. This Ghost King sect disciple's intonation was rather strange. His words paused after paused. Together with his stiff movements, he looked like a wooden man. Not knowing where he was transferred from, he actually did not look like one. But right now, Taoist Song Song could not be bothered, said directly, "Where is Ghost King's sect head? We have something to report to him." That Ghost King sect disciple still had that stiff look, slowly turned and pointed to the depths of that red light screen, said, "Sect head, inside, waited for you for a long time, Taoist Song Song was extremely impatient. Hearing this person's words really took up his energy. He waved his hand and said, "All right, you lead the way." That Ghost King sect disciple nodded, turned and walked, his mouth slowly said, "Yes." The group of them again walked towards that abyss. Taoist Song Song initially wanted to ask what was going on with the sudden huge change, but the few senses just now completely destroyed his patience. Asking such a stiff Ghost King sect disciple was really like suffering. Might as well directly ask Ghost King sect head later. Jean Pinger followed behind them, walking slowly, her eyes quietly watching those Ghost King sect disciples around her. Other than their movements being slightly stiff, they were no different from ordinary people. There was nothing strange about them, but Jean Pinger's inexplicable vigilance instead became heavier. As they gradually walked into that abyss, getting closer to the red light, Jean Pinger suddenly discovered that the eyes of those Ghost King sect disciples walking beside her suddenly started to turn faint red, like dark red blood, and all of their movements started to no longer be stiff, slowly became light and quick. Instead, it seemed like that red light screen gave them some kind of strength. Getting closer and closer to that strange red light screen. Looked like it was only 2 zhongs away. Taoist Song Song suddenly felt a sense of uneasiness, just that he himself could not explain this sudden feeling. At this moment, suddenly a light cry was heard from behind. Everyone turned and looked. Jean Pinger, who was perfectly fine, just now suddenly sat on the ground, her hand clutching her chest, panting and coughing loudly. Her face pale, looked like she was in great pain. Taoist Song Song was shocked, said, "What happened to you?" Jean Pinger panted a few times, shook her head with a bitter smile, and said, "This is an old problem. Sometimes I'm like this. Suddenly there's a sharp pain in my chest, and then the pain will last for almost an hour, and then it will be fine again. This problem has been cured for many years. Didn't expect it to act up again today." Taoist Song Song was stunned for a moment, said, "Then now what will you do?" Jean Pinger looked very tired, quietly said, "I am fine. I'll be fine after rest. How about this? You go in and report to Ghost King Sec head first. I will be right behind." Taoist Song frowned, pondered for a moment, nodded, and said, "Then that is the only way. Have a good rest yourself." Jean Pinger weakly smiled and said, "Many thanks, priest." Taoist Song snorted, turned, and walked forward. With Jean Pinger's sudden interruption, he had forgotten the uneasiness in his heart. The dozens of Ghost King sect disciples behind him seemed to be in a little confusion. It seemed that although their bodies were no longer stiff, but their brains were still not sharp. Their red eyes swept here and there. In the end, most of them still followed Taoist Song, leaving only two people standing beside Jean Pinger. Jean Pinger sat on the ground, coughed and panted as she watched that large group of people escorting Taoist Song into that stretch of blood-colored light, after which there was no more sound. Her head slowly drooped down. Her panting slowly became hurried again, but her hidden gaze suddenly became clear and bright. Taoist Song did not know that not long ago in that valley, behind the woods upstream of the stream, Jean Pinger saw some corpses of Ghost King sect disciples, and the way they died, Jean Pinger would never forget it. Because a long time ago, she had seen it with her own eyes during the demon beast catastrophe that engulfed the world. And right now, those Ghost King sect disciples standing beside her, their eyes indistinctly glinted with blood-red light, almost the same as those crazy demon beasts, although she did not know why, and these Ghost King sect disciples were not as crazy as the demon beasts, but Jean Pinger had already made up her mind she must not walk into that red light. Inside, there was a terrible presence. This was her intuition. Jean Pinger's panting became louder and louder. The two Ghost King sect disciples standing beside her seemed to be indifferent to what was happening around them, but after a moment, suddenly a strange sound was heard from behind them, like some stone hitting the ground. Jean Pinger faced the direction of the sound, and then her countenance changed greatly, stood up, and hoarsely said, "What? Why are you here too?" The two Ghost King sect disciples were shocked, saw Jean Pinger was so shocked, couldn't help but turned around. Who knew after they turned around, it was empty behind them, there was nothing at all, not to mention human figure, not even a stone figure. It was like they had seen a ghost. The two of them could not make heads or tails of it, turned around, and wanted to question Jean Pinger. Unexpectedly, when they turned around, Jean Pinger, who was standing behind them, had also disappeared, as if she had never appeared at this place, leaving behind an empty land. The two Ghost King sect disciples were shocked, looked at each other, and then shouted, but their voices did not sound like human voices, more like the roars of wild beasts. After circling twice, the two of them turned and dashed into the red light. Far away, Jean Pinger behind a large stone slowly revealed her figure. That escape seemed simple, but in fact it had used up all of her wits and skills. Until now, she then slowly heaved a sigh of relief and realized that her forehead was full of cold sweat. Just that before she could relax, suddenly, deep inside that red light, a painful cry was heard. It was Taoist Song's voice. Jean Pinger's body shook and immediately shrunk behind the stone to hide. Taoist Song's cry, although sharp, but very quickly it became weaker and disappeared. What followed was a rumbling, maniacal laughter. That voice was filled with madness, as if everything in this world would be trampled under his feet. The mountains also trembled, the echoes rumbling. Jean Pinger's face turned pale. Her body actually started to tremble. Although the voice had changed, but she clearly understood, it was Ghost King's laughter. 1,000 miles away, Qing Yun Hill, Tong Tian Peak, Founder's ancestral hall at the back of the mountain. This place was still as peaceful as usual. The majestic and imposing hall was situated in the forest, emitting a solemn atmosphere. The dense forest was quiet. Bird cries, clear and melodious, traveled over from afar. Indistinctly in the dim hall, that little bit of incense in the shadows could be seen. Lin Jingyu raised his head and looked at the sky. The sky above his head was azure blue, not a cloud in 10,000 li. The warm sunlight shone on his body, bringing with it a comfortable warmth. From the dark green dragon slayer sword hanging at his waist, it reflected beautiful and ever-changing rays of light. Seemed like today was a good day. He watched for a while. His lips slowly revealed a trace of smile which he had not seen for a long time, then picked up the broom in his hand and started to sweep the empty space in front of Founder's ancestral hall. Ever since that mysterious old man passed away, Qing Yun Hill had undergone several changes, but under the drastic changes, no one noticed this secluded corner, which had long stood aloof from worldly affairs, and Lin Jingyu, instead, seemed to be sentimentally attached to this place. Maybe it was because of that old man. Anyway, unknowingly, under many people's tacit approval, Lin Jingyu became the successor to guard Founder's ancestral hall here. The withered yellow leaves, under the brandishing of the broom, rolled up one by one and swept to one side. Lin Jingyu quietly swept, doing what he had to do every day. The forest was quiet, a gentle breeze blew, but not knowing if this kind of life would it be more peaceful than the past. Chapter 491. Just that this day seemed destined to not be peaceful. Silently, just when Lin Jingyu was concentrating on sweeping the fallen leaves on the ground, suddenly a pair of feet appeared in front of him. Lin Jingyu was shocked. If it was not the day of ancestor worship, usually no one from Qingyun sect would come for a few months, and today was even more of an ordinary day. Why would someone come? He looked up. Unexpectedly with this look, he was even more shocked. Made his body tremble. He actually took a step back. His expression changed, exclaimed in shock, Sect head, teacher, uncle. Standing before him was Qingyun's sect head, Reverend Daoxian, who had been missing for many days. Reverend Daoxian was still wearing that dark green Taoist robe, just that some parts of it looked tattered. In the past, no matter what, it was unthinkable that this would actually happen to the world-renowned Qingyun sect head, Reverend Daoxian. Right now, looking at him, Reverend Daoxian was expressionless, seemed thinner than he remembered, but seemed to have gone through the vicissitudes of life. Lin Jingyu was extremely confused. Although he was not a core member of Qingyun's sect and naturally was not as knowledgeable as Small Bamboo Valley Shuiwa teacher and disciple. But that day, when Reverend Daoxian and Tian Bui clashed at Founder's ancestral hall, he was still present. And after that, both of them disappeared. Now Tian Bui had passed away. Reverend Daoxian instead quietly returned here. The twists and turns were strange, directly made one's heart turn cold. But although Lin Jingyu was shocked and in a state of confusion, Reverend Daoxian seemed not to care about him. His eyes only paused on Lin Jingyu for a moment, and then looked at that Grand Founder's ancestral hall. Reverend Daoxian looked at that hall for a long time, suddenly slowly said, "You are the only one here now?" Lin Jingyu was stunned for a moment, nodded and said yes. Reverend Daoxian glanced at him. Suddenly his eyes froze, landed on the Dragon Slayer's sword hanging at Lin Jingyu's waist. The dark green sword light gently swirled. Although the old friend had left, but it still carried that unique arrogance. Outstanding. The dark green light reflected in his eyes. Reverend Daoxian's expression also changed, slowly revealing a perplexed and contemplative expression. Lin Jingyu's mind was in a mess, not knowing if he should immediately go to the front mountain to report to Tongtian Peak teachers, or continue to watch here. But Reverend Daoxian did not give him too much time to think. His strange expression very quickly disappeared, replacing it with a kind of indifference. He indifferently said to Bei, "You stay here. Without my instructions, no one is allowed to come in." After speaking, without waiting for Lin Jingyu to reply, he strode over and went straight into the dark great hall of Founder's ancestral hall. Lin Jingyu stood rooted to the ground, not knowing what to do. He could only watch Reverend Daoxian's figure disappear into the darkness. Entering the inner hall, after the initial darkness, what appeared in front of Reverend Daoxian was the huge offering table in the great hall, and behind it were the innumerable tablets. A solemn atmosphere greeted him. Qingyun's sect ancestors were here, coldly and silently watching Reverend Daoxian's figure. Reverend Daoxian's body trembled slightly, as if something in his body was acting up, causing him pain, but he quickly endured it, slowly walked to the offering table, took the sandalwood incense on the table, lit it on the candle beside, walked to the front of the offering table, facing the ancestors' tablets. He slowly knelt down. In the dim light, his face also seemed to be uncertain. Only that little bit of warmth from the incense floated up faint smoke. Qingyun sect ancestors, unworthy disciple Daoxian. His voice was low and hoarse. Both hands holding the incense seemed to be trembling slightly, as if his heart was extremely agitated to the extent that he stopped halfway through his sentence. His head buried deeply, prostrated before the innumerable tablets. In the spacious, grand, great hall, a gust of wind started to blow. The surrounding curtains started to gently flutter. Even the candles on the offering table started to flicker. Suddenly, Reverend Daoxian, who was prostrating on the ground, suddenly shook. Not knowing how he used his strength, the 3 sandalwood incense in his hands suddenly suffered a huge corrosive force. In an instant, soundlessly turned into powder, and a ball of black energy, at this moment, spread out from Reverend Daoxian's body, rapidly surging, continuously expanding. It looked like it was about to completely envelop Reverend Daoxian's body within it. Lin Jingyu, who was standing outside the great hall, as if he sensed something, frowned, could not help but took a step towards the great hall. In the depths of that shadow, a ball of strange energy suddenly rose. The evil energy was heavy, definitely not what this founder's ancestral hall originally had. Reverend Daoxian's strange expression flashed in his mind, a wave of uneasiness, but looking at that grand great hall, he instead hesitated. The mountain forest was silent, the surroundings of Founder's ancestral hall. In a blink, even the chirping of birds disappeared, as if those birds also sensed an inexplicable danger. All of them kept quiet out of fear. In the great hall, Reverend Daoxian's body shook even more violently. The black energy surrounding him also became thicker and thicker. In the originally silent great hall, a whirlwind appeared, making a low, deep howling sound, blowing rapidly in the spacious hall. The wind became stronger and stronger. Reverend Daoxian's body trembled. Under the shroud of the black energy, he slowly stood up. At this moment, the expression on his face seemed to have changed into a different person, filled with a ruthless energy. But looking carefully behind the ruthlessness, Reverend Daoxian's eyes had another kind of pain, so much so that the muscles on his face contorted, as if he had been forcing himself to endure something, but looking at the situation, it was obvious that he could not hold on any longer. And at this strange and dangerous juncture, the gust of strange wind surrounding him also became stronger. Not only it started to blow the heavy offering table backwards, even those tablets on the incense table far behind the offering table were also affected. Many of the tablets swayed incessantly in the strong wind. Some even showed signs of falling. As Qing Yun's sect, Reverend Daoxian, to collide with the ancestral tablets like this, it could be said to be disgraceful and heresy. Just that looking at his expression, that ruthlessness was getting heavier and heavier. How could he still care about this? Right at this moment, a light paw sound was heard. Sure enough, under the strong wind, one of the tablets placed at the edge of the incense burner table finally could not support it and fell down, landing on the stones on the floor, making a clear sound. This sound also seemed to startle Reverend Daoxian, who was struggling to hold on. He subconsciously turned his head to look. In that instant, for some reason, his entire body shook, as if a basin of cold water was poured on his head. The ruthlessness quickly faded. The strange black energy also somehow disappeared. On his face, only remorse and sorrow were left. Under the dim light, that tablet that had fallen onto the floor quietly laid there, not moving at all. And on the wooden tablet, it was actually a blank space. This was a blank tablet with no words. That blank space seemed to be coldly staring at him. Reverend Daoxian's lips trembled slightly, stared blankly at that blank tablet, and then slowly walked over, gently picked up this blank tablet, carefully caressed it in his hand. Not knowing how long had passed, in the darkness, his hoarse and slightly choked voice was heard. "Junior brother." Outside the founder's ancestral hall, Lin Jingyu was so anxious that sweat broke out on his forehead. He struggled in his heart for countless times, finally hardened his heart, prepared to disregard everything and rush in to see what exactly was going on in the founder's ancestral hall. Who knew just when he was about to leap up, that strange atmosphere in the hall suddenly disappeared. Lin Jingyu this time was again bewildered. He had originally made up his mind. This step could not be taken. After all, no matter what, inside the founder's ancestral hall, was Qin Yun's sect's current sect head, Reverend Dao Xian. In the past, he had saved the common people several times, not to mention the commoners. Even Qin Yun's sect ordinary disciples, including Lin Jingyu, also regarded him as a celestial being. This hesitation, again, waited for a long time. Lin Jingyu had never felt that time pass so slowly. Even these few days when he was alone facing the desolate and empty ancestral hall, he had never felt this way. And until he started to suspect if his cultivation was not enough, Reverend Dao Xian's figure once again appeared at the entrance of the hall. His expression was still that expressionless, unhurriedly walked down, did not take another look at Lin Jingyu. Lin Jingyu did not know why. Maybe it was because of Reverend Dao Xian's past imposing manner. He did not dare to ask, quietly moved aside. When Reverend Dao Xian passed by him, he suddenly stopped. After a moment, he was heard saying in a low voice, "Take good care of him." Lin Jingyu was surprised, did not know who Reverend Dao Xian was referring to, but since he had just come out from the founder's ancestral hall, most likely he was referring to the memorial tablets of the Qin Yun sect founders. He nodded, respectfully said, "Disciple understands." Reverend Dao Xian looked deeply at him. His eyes sized him up, looked at Lin Jingyu's white attire, the dark green dragon slayer sword at his waist, suddenly laughed bitterly, said really alike. Lin Jingyu for a moment did not understand. When he raised his head and wanted to ask, Reverend Dao Xian had already left. Looking at his direction, he was heading towards Qin Yun's sect's most important forbidden place, Illusory Moon Cave. Lin Jingyu hesitated for a moment, finally decided to enter the founder's ancestral hall to take a look, turned and picked up the broom that he had carelessly thrown on the ground, walked into the founder's ancestral hall. He looked around, saw that everything in the ancestral hall was the same as before, as if nothing had changed. He frowned, walked to the incense table where the generations of founders were worshipped. On the table, a small bronze incense burner, 3 newly lit sandalwood incense sticks were inserted, quietly burning, a faint sandalwood fragrance wafting in the air. Suddenly, his eyes froze. On the incense table where numerous tablets were placed, one tablet was placed too close to the side of the table. He frowned. These few days he had been tidying up this place. He was very familiar with the position of the tablets. Therefore, very quickly he discovered that the tablets seemed to have been moved. If a Qin Yun sect disciple rashly touched the ancestral tablets, this was not a small sin. He gently shook his head, walked over, picked up the tablet, and was about to put it back on the incense table. Suddenly his body shook. His eyes could not leave the tablet in his hand. Unlike the other memorial tablets, there was no name or title written in gold paint on the memorial tablet, because it was originally a blank memorial tablet. However, at this moment, there was an additional line of words on the memorial tablet in Lin Jingyu's hand. Qin Yun sect, Wan Jianyi's tablet. This row of words, dark red dazzling, written with fresh blood. Chapter 492. Below Jade Hill, Grass Temple Village ruins. The sun rose and set, day and night changed. Ainen completely could not remember how many days she had been here. The yearning and affection she had for him for the past 10 years seemed to have suddenly gone out of control. She could not and did not want to endure it anymore. Every day and every night, she wanted to accompany that man. If there was a future, then it would be forever. Ghostly, no. It should be Zhang Xiaofan, at least in Ainen's eyes. He had never changed. That haggard and sorrowful man was gently held in her arms, still motionless and perplexed. These days, Ainen had thought of various ways to wake Zhang Xiaofan from his heart's devil, but without exception, all failed. Until the end, Ainen also temporarily gave up. Perhaps only she could truly understand the pain Ghostly was feeling. So she no longer tried to wake him, only quietly accompanied him, hugged him. The two of them, like that in the grass-covered ruins of Grass Temple Village, quietly sat, watching the sunrise in the morning, watching the sunset, watching the moon rise in the sky, watching the stars twinkling in the sky. The wind of the wilderness blew past, bringing with it the fragrance of the grass that covered the land, gently blowing against their faces. Not knowing why, even with a trace of guilt in her heart, But Ainin really from the bottom of her heart felt a kind of happiness. To be together with the person she loved, such a simple matter, she had endured for 10 years, shouldered the mountain-like pressure. At this moment, she finally broke free from the shackles, threw away all the shackles just for him. The breeze blew, bringing a wave of coolness. Another night had arrived. The two of them leaned on the broken wall, quietly sat. The wild grass next to them rustled, like there was something strange, but Ainin did not look at it. After a moment, Ash's figure came out from the grass, jumped onto the broken wall where Ainin and Zhang Xiaofan were leaning on, and sat down. The bandages that Xiao Bai used to bandage him were gone. The exposed wounds were mostly healed. Seemed like Ash tore them off himself. The monkey was sitting on the broken wall, spread out his hands. A large pile of wild fruits scattered and fell. Most of them fell on Ainin and Zhang Xiaofan. Zhang Xiaofan was stupefied and did not react. Ainin's head was also hit a few. Although it was not painful, it was not very elegant, very different from her usual cold temperament. Lu Sueki looked at the wild fruits on the ground, raised her head and glanced at the monkey on the broken wall. Xiao Hui immediately jumped up and retreated a few steps. Its eyes filled with vigilance, but its hands were still grabbing a few wild fruits, chewing them in its mouth. Not sure if it was because the monkey and Ainin did not get along well. In Ash's eyes, Sha Danan being hugged by the white dress girl was not pleasing to his eyes. But he had seen Ainin's cultivation before, although he made a provocative action, but he was still a bit afraid. Just when Xiao Hui's 3 eyes were staring at Lu Sueki, that white-attired lady who had always been otherworldly suddenly smiled at it. This smile was like the blooming of flowers in spring, the warmth of the spring breeze, where was the slightest trace of her usual cold and aloof manner. Lu Sueki did not flare up and instead looked to be in a good mood, smiled at Xiao Hui, and picked up a wild fruit from the ground, softly said, "Did you pick it back? Thank you." Xiao Hui was obviously stunned by Lu Sueki's strange reaction. After a long time, its 3 eyes rolled around for a long time. Its mouth drew back, laughed dryly, and embarrassedly sat back on the broken wall, minding its own business to eat the wild fruits. Lu Sueki smiled at the monkey and turned her head back. To her, how could that cold look be innate? Her eyes landed on Sha Danan's face, said softly, "Xiao Fan, eat something." Sha Danan's eyes were blank, did not say anything, did not nod or shake his head. Ainin seemed like she already knew he would have this reaction. She was not angry. She smiled to herself, lowered her head, and carefully peeled the wild fruit with her long white fingers. These days, Sha Danan was always like this. Ash often went to find some wild fruit. Ainin peeled the fruit and put it in his mouth. Sha Danan, like a machine, would occasionally eat a piece or two. But what does it matter? Ainin thought lightly in her heart. She had waited for 10 years. As long as she can be with him, no matter how long it is, she will not care. She lowered her head and carefully peeled the fruit. Suddenly, she saw something from the corner of her eyes. She startled, then slowly put down the wild fruit. Sha Danan sat woodenly without any reaction. But these days, his hand was tightly clenched into a fist. Ainin also noticed it, but she did not care about it. But when she looked at Sha Danan's hand, she saw there was something in Sha Danan's hand. A corner of it was revealed. She frowned, put down the wild fruit, pulled Sha Danan's arm, tried to pry open his hand to see what was in his palm. Sha Danan was still blank, but his hand was tightly clenched. Ainin could not pry it open. She could only raise his hand a little bit and force to see. Sha Danan was still tightly clenched in his hand. It was a piece of green cloth corner. Ainin silently looked at the small piece of cloth, slowly put down Sha Danan's hand. Sadness flashed across her face, but then she took a deep breath. When she looked at Sha Danan again, her eyes were filled with gentleness. Gently, Ainin reached out her hand and hugged Sha Danan in her arms. The wind blew, her hair fluttered, some fell on Sha Danan's face. "Xiao Fan, it will be okay. Everything will be okay." She smiled, although there were tears in her eyes. Her voice was still soft and low. "A long, long time ago, when I was still a child, I remember my mother hugged me, watching the stars at night like this." Lu Sueki slowly raised his head and looked at the night sky. The sky was as dark as ink, and the stars twinkled in the night sky. She told me that although everyone has to die, good people will become stars after death and live a good life in the sky. Every night, they will watch over us from the sky. She is a good person, isn't she? Then she may be watching you from the sky, Xiao Fan. No matter what, she will not want you to become like this, don't you think? Sha Danan was lying in Ainan's arms. His stiff body seemed to tremble a little. Lu Sweki smiled softly. Two streams of tears quietly rolled down under the starlight. Her beautiful face in the light of tears seemed to have a kind of poignant beauty, but her hands hugged the man in her arms even more tightly. Tightly hugged him. As long as it is like this. Nonsense. Suddenly, a shout came from the side. The voice carried the impatience and faint anger of a boss. Lu Sweki was shocked, looked to the side, saw a plump and beautiful girl standing at the side, her eyebrows alluring. It was Xiao Bai. Xiao Hui, who was behind Lu Sweki, cried out in joy, jumped down from the broken wall, dashed to Xiao Bai, and climbed up, sat on her shoulder, grinned and laughed. Obviously, it favored Xiao Bai. Compared to Lu Sweki, it could not be mentioned in the same breath. But at this moment, Ainan would not care about the monkey. She frowned, a little puzzled, asked Xiao Bai, who suddenly appeared. What? Xiao Bai's face was pale. It seemed that she was quite angry, but upon closer inspection, her expression was rather complicated. Under her anger, there was a hint of heartache. She was heard saying coldly, when a person is dead, he is dead. At most, he will turn into a ghost and enter the underworld to enter the cycle of reincarnation. There is no such thing as turning into a star. These words were really unpleasant to hear. Even though Lu Sweki had always been grateful to Xiao Bai for telling her the whole story, and that Ghostly was in the ruins, her face could not help but darkened. But before Ainan could speak, Xiao Bai already stepped forward, but did not look at Ainan, only stared at Sha Danan, said coldly, How long do you want to continue like this? Do you want to live like a living dead for the rest of your life? Lil White asked sternly. Ainan's expression changed, showed she could not bear it. She was about to say something, but she forced herself to hold it back. But her hand seemed to feel heartache. She hugged Sha Danan tighter. Sha Danan was scolded by Xiao Bai. The muscles on his face twitched, but then he closed his eyes, returned to his closed self-appearance. Xiao Bai looked at him like this. Her anger seemed to increase. She grabbed Sha Danan's collar and lifted him up. Ainan screamed, said, Don't do this, he can't stand it. Xiao Bai laughed coldly, said, I'm scolding to wake him up. No, I'm not only scolding to wake him up, I'm going to beat him to wake him up. Then, without waiting for Ainan to react, Xiao Bai suddenly raised her hand, slapped Sha Danan's face. Pa! Pa! The slaps were clear and loud. Sha Danan's face was swollen under the two red palm marks. Blood came out from the corner of his mouth. He fell backward. Ainan was surprised. She quickly pushed Xiao Bai away and hugged Sha Danan. She did not care about the blood and used her sleeve to wipe it for Sha Danan. Touching the two palm marks on his face, Ainan felt heartache. She stared at Xiao Bai, said angrily, Are you crazy? Xiao Bai turned a deaf ear to Ainan. She stared at Sha Danan, who was trembling, said coldly, What are you doing? Pretending to be a ghost all day long, or you're using this method to mourn for Bailu. I tell you, don't be an idiot. What you're doing is useless. Bailu is dead. She is dead. Roar. Suddenly, a desperate roar came from Ainan's arms. Sha Danan pushed her away. Like a furious wounded beast, he charged at Xiao Bai. But Xiao Bai just stood there and did not dodge. When Ghostly roared and charged at her, she did not retreat, but stepped forward and gave him another slap. Pa! An even louder sound suddenly echoed in the ruins of Grass Temple Village. Sha Danan was knocked to the side. A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth, staining the clothes on his chest. A trace of pain seemed to flash past Xiao Bai's face, but she clenched her teeth. Her expression instead became even more severe, scurried a few steps to Ghostly, who was panting weakly on the ground, grabbed his clothes, angrily shouted, Wake up! Even if you die like this, Bila will not come back to life. You think this is the only way you can show your remorse? You want to use this method to torture yourself to make your heart feel better? I tell you, it is useless. Shah Danon closed his eyes tightly. His body trembled violently. He breathed heavily. Even his lips seemed to have lost its color. Crystal clear tears quietly rolled down. This time, it was from Little White's eyes. She bit her lips. 2 streams of tears also flowed down her cheeks, and her voice was already choked with sobs. What do you think Bai Yao risked everything to save you? Was it because she wanted to see you live out your life like this? Bai Lu's death has nothing to do with you. If you continue like this, Bai Lu's soul in heaven will not rest in peace. Do you understand? Xiaobai grabbed him, slowly kneeled next to him. Like using the last of her strength with a hoarse voice, she said word by word, "Live. Live well. This is what Bai Lu wants to see." After saying that, as if she could not bear it any longer, she suddenly stood up, turned around, and strode out of the place. Lu Sueki had been quietly standing at the side. When Xiaobai strode past her, Lu Sueki suddenly softly said, "Thank you." There were still tears on Xiaobai's face. She paused and looked at Anan. Under the moonlight, the 2 beautiful ladies shined on each other. After a moment, they held out their hands and held each other's hand. On Xiaobai's face, behind the tears, there was a faint smile. She nodded to Anan, did not say anything, and walked away. After her figure disappeared into the darkness, Anan slowly walked to Shah Danon. She squatted down and held him in her arms. Shah Danon's body was trembling. He slowly raised his head and looked at Anan. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.